The first time Gendry Baratheon, though he still thought of himself simply as Gendry, the blacksmith, set his mind to creating Valyrian steel. The memory of the long night was still fresh in the minds of every living soul in Westeros. The Great War had been won, but at a staggering price, and the cost of rebuilding weighed heavily upon every house. Those who had witnessed the terrors beyond the wall, and the countless dead menaces roving across the snow-swept fields, were irrevocably changed. The old ways no longer felt adequate. Strength was needed, the kind of strength that had once shaped empires and toppled kings. In the battered remnants of King's Landing, Gendry's forge stood in a courtyard that had been partially blasted by dragonfire. Scorched walls still bore blackened stones, and rubble was piled in corners where no one had bothered to clear it yet. With a single-minded dedication, he had repaired the old smithy piece by piece, stubbornly hoisting fragments of the roof alone, setting them in place with sweat and calloused hands. A half-broken anvil had been replaced by a fresh block of iron. The flames of the forge roared with the same intensity as the braziers once lit for war, and Gendry spent endless days and nights in that enclosed space, the clang of his hammer echoing off the walls that still smelled of ash. He was no stranger to forging. He had once worked in Tobho Mott's shop, had made helms and swords that were good and strong, but never special, until he reforged ice-cold shards into a blade for the fight against the Night King's forces. But true Valyrian steel, new Valyrian steel from raw materials, was a different matter. It was said the secrets of its creation had died with the doom of Valyria centuries before. Maesters wrote that it required dragonfire and spells unknown to all but the greatest smiths of lost Valyria. Yet legends persisted that a handful of secrets had trickled down through the generations. Wordless spells hammered into metal by sorcerer smiths. There had been attempts throughout history to replicate that black steel laced with swirling patterns, harder yet lighter than common steel, sharper than any blade a mortal man could craft. What? All had failed. But Gendry could not help himself. He had come so far, been knighted, recognized by Queen Daenerys before her downfall, then quietly legitimized by a council that thought him a useful piece in the puzzle of rebuilding the realm. He was Gendry Baratheon now, Lord of Storms, and by a quirk of politics and the final testament of a realm desperate to reward heroes. Though he claimed to want none of it, the title was his. And yet he was still the same bastard boy who had shaped metal all his life. He would find a way to do it, or he would die trying. When the rumor reached him of a hidden cache of old Valyrian steel scraps locked away in Casterly Rock's deepest vaults, he felt a stirring in his chest, like the pounding of a smith's hammer. Pieces, no bigger than shards, cast-offs from a broken sword, or so the rumor said. He needed something to study, something that might yield a clue, anything that might show him how to replicate the swirling patterns that came only from dragonflame and sorcery. It took a year to negotiate, sending ravens back and forth, bartering with the new Lady of the Rock, who was none other than Sir Jaime Lannister's daughter, by some scandalous rumor, or else a distant cousin, but in truth was simply a caretaker of Lannister power in the aftermath of the wars. Eventually, through a combination of storms and grain shipments, and the promise of forging arms for Casterly Rock's men, Gendry gained access to those scraps. He locked himself away with them, studied them by lamplight late into the night. He heated them, hammered them, tempered them in oils. He listened for that faint ringing that separated Valyrian steel from the mundane. He watched how the color changed in the flame. He might as well have been studying the language of dragons, for all the sense it made at first. Days slipped by like that, sometimes weeks, with him emerging from the forge only to gulp down a meager dinner or stretch his stiff limbs. If anyone came calling, lords or ladies, peasants or merchants, he waved them off until a small mountain of letters gathered in Storm's End's hall, unopened. Gradually, he discovered subtle quirks. The metal seemed to take shape almost by itself if he struck it just right, with a swift downward blow and a slight twist of the wrist. If he hammered too heavily, it warped into brittle lumps. If he hammered too lightly, it refused to fuse with regular steel. Those nights of experiments were lessons taught in bruises and burns, but bit by bit, the shape of the steel began to speak to him. He never found any arcane instructions or hidden scrolls, only guesswork and a strange sense that each blow had to carry not just force, but some intangible intention. He began humming under his breath as he worked, thinking about everything he had seen. The whites, the dragons, the glow of dawn on a field of ice. He poured those memories into the forging process, imagining them folding and blending with the molten metal, as if memory itself were part of the mixture. Then one fateful night, the steel sang to him. He was half delirious from lack of sleep, chest slick with sweat, arms quivering. The forge's coals glowed red against his face, and the clang of his hammer on the small shard filled the courtyard with a resonant note. The swirling pattern emerged like smoky tendrils in the metal. He tempered it carefully, dunking it into oil he had set aside. When he lifted it free, the steel was blacker than the night sky, with that eerie watery glisten. The edge looked impossibly thin, keen enough to split a hair. He tested it on a leather scrap. The scrap parted in utter silence, no drag on the blade. His heart pounded. He had discovered the method. Through trial, error, and something dangerously akin to prayer, Gendry forged a small dagger that night. Just a simple one, the handle nothing more than plain steel hammered onto a tang. But the blade was genuine Valyrian steel, flexible yet unyielding, so thin and sharp that the slightest flick would have parted flesh or hide. The swirl of its pattern was mesmerizing, as if dancing shadows were imprisoned beneath the surface. He stared at it so long his vision blurred. Then he let out a roar of exultation that echoed off the walls, startling the guards who stood watch. In the weeks that followed, he refined his process. He realized one sample wasn't enough. He needed more raw materials, more of the fabled dragon glass, more fragments of older Valyrian steel to fold into the new, more of the rare oils used by the alchemists in King's Landing. But each day he grew more certain that he could replicate what he had done. And that, he realized, was no small thing. If he could do it once, maybe he could do it 100 times. Perhaps with luck, he could forge an entire new age of Valyrian steel in Westeros. Word traveled quickly. Lords and ladies from all corners of the realm began sending envoys. The new king on the Iron Throne, Bran Stark, the Broken King, dispatched official word that the crown sought to employ Gendry's expertise, but Gendry was no longer some unknown bastard who could be coerced. He was Lord of Storm's End, beloved by many for his role in the final battles against the undead, and the forging of that first dagger had become a legend overnight. Everyone wanted a piece of the black steel. The age when the White Walkers roamed was over, but who was to say what new threats might arise? Dragons still soared somewhere in the Far East, if rumors of Drogon's survival were to be believed. The Greyjoys were stirring in their isles, rebuilding their fleets. Dorne watched with cunning eyes, always waiting for the right moment to reassert itself. The realm needed strong alliances, and nothing sealed alliances like the gift of Valyrian steel, a treasure that had once been so rare that only a handful of swords existed. Now, the rumor went, Gendry the blacksmith lord could create entire armies of them. He did not intend to craft them for everyone. The idea alone of forging so many such blades was madness. Each forging demanded a near superhuman effort, and something more intangible, a depth of will, of spirit, that left him drained and sometimes trembling at night with an exhausted mania he couldn't put into words. But as letters poured in, he found himself reading them, considering them carefully. A seed of an idea formed in his mind. The realm's politics still simmered. The great houses eyed one another warily, some licking old wounds, others consolidating whatever power they had left. So many had died, so many had lost everything. Yet the seeds of war always remained in Westeros, waiting to sprout. What if he found a way to bring them together, to make them share something, a pledge of unity so strong it could not be easily discarded? The notion was absurd, and yet it followed him to his forge. Each time he hammered out a piece of steel, he felt the potential. If all the great houses wielded blades of Valyrian steel, they would be equals in that regard at least. No single house would hold the advantage of the rare black steel. Perhaps in the arms race that had crippled Westeros for generations, that equality might act as a deterrent to more bloodshed. If everyone had the same advantage, what would be the point of warring for it? It was a naive dream, but Gendry nurtured it. He had no illusions about the cunning and treachery that lurked in the hearts of lords and ladies. Yet he couldn't forget the horrors they all had faced. He had seen them stand side by side against an army of the dead. For one brief moment the old grievances had not mattered. In the face of extinction, they had become a single force, unstoppable in their unity. Perhaps that could happen again, only this time without a monstrous threat driving them together out of fear. Perhaps they could forge a peace as strong as Valyrian steel itself. And so he made a decision that would change Westeros forever. He would forge a blade for each great house. Not 1,000 swords, not a horde of weapons to blanket the realm in black steel. Just one masterpiece for each house, a symbol that they too possessed the power that once was the domain of only a few. One sword for House Stark, one for House Lannister, one for House Baratheon. Though that was ostensibly for himself, he almost laughed at the idea. One for House Targaryen, if the rumors of the remaining scions proved true. One for House Arryn, House Tully, House Tyrell's successors, House Martell, House Greyjoy. He would place each blade personally into their hands, ensuring that no single house could claim to be bereft of his gift. And maybe, just maybe, they would see that the realm was better off for it. Of course, the challenge was enormous. He had only begun to scratch the surface of the forging process. Each sword was a project that would take weeks, if not months, of painstaking labor. The materials alone were daunting. Dragon glass from Dragonstone's mines, special oils from the alchemists, fragments of old Valyrian steel acquired from the ruins of castles or the hidden stashes. Even the smallest piece was worth a fortune in gold. But Gendry was stubborn. He had hammered iron in the heat of war. He had outrun whites in the frozen wastes north of the Wall. He had survived the fall of 2 kings, the betrayal of the Red Woman, the terror of the Hound's blade at his throat. If any man could do this, it was Gendry. He began with one commission, the sword for House Stark. He still remembered King Bran's quiet words when they last met. How the boy, no, the man, spoke of seeing many things. Even as a king, Bran was strange, distant, seeming to peer through Gendry's face and into some far-flung dream. Yet he had supported Gendry's mission with unwavering calm, providing him with men to gather dragonglass from Dragonstone, to accompany him on a dangerous trek to Valyria's smoking sea in search of rumored artifacts. Gendry decided House Stark would be the first to receive a new blade. For months, Gendry toiled in Storm's End's forge, sealing himself off from visitors. A small group of apprentices assisted him, but the core forging process he handled alone. None but he would shape the steel. None but he would speak the half-remembered incantations he had pieced together from old texts and from his own desperate intuition. He hammered carefully, folding the steel again and again, layering the shards of old Valyrian steel with newly refined metal and flecks of dragon glass. He let the swirl of the metal guide him, sometimes changing the tempo of his strikes, other times adjusting the color of the flame, adding pinch after pinch of mysterious black powder he had purchased at ruinous cost from a Braavosi merchant. Day by day, the steel lengthened, took shape, revealing patterns like twisting vines beneath the surface. When at last the sword was complete, it shone with a dark gleam. He had carved a snarling direwolf's head into the pommel from a block of weirwood. The crossguard was plain steel, but etched with runes reminiscent of the old gods. Running his thumb along the edge, Gendry felt a sting, and a single bead of blood welled up. It was sharper than any blade he had ever crafted, but there was a deeper resonance, like it possessed its own heartbeat. He named it Dawnwolf, for it was meant to honor House Stark's part in the long night, and the new dawn that had come after. He wrapped the blade in oilcloth, carried it himself to King's Landing, where Bran Stark now held his court in the half-rebuilt Red Keep. Though Gendry was a lord, he had never become comfortable with finery or ceremony. He approached the throne with the sword in hand, ignoring the gasps from courtiers and lords who thought it unseemly to carry a naked blade in the presence of the king. Beside the king stood Ser Brienne of Tarth, sworn to protect him, her face impassive yet not unkind. King Bran regarded Gendry with those ancient, fathomless eyes. "So you have succeeded," Bran said. There was a hint of a question in his voice, but also the faintest trace of a smile. "I have," Gendry replied, kneeling, though it did not come easily to him. "Your Grace, I present you with this sword. May it serve House Stark and the realm, now and always." King Bran's gloved hands reached out, and Gendry laid the sword across them. Bran's expression did not change, but his voice held a note of something that could have been pride. "Thank you, Lord Baratheon. We shall remember this gift." Whispers flew among the courtiers. Many had seen Valyrian steel swords before, but never a newly forged one. This was unprecedented. Some had said it was impossible. Yet here it lay, gleaming darkly in the king's hands. Gendry bowed and retreated, ignoring the stares. He paid no mind to the speculation or to the subtle flickers of jealousy that passed across certain faces. He only knew that one blade was finished, and many more remained. News of Dawnwolf spread like wildfire. Lords and ladies from the Vale to the Reach, from the Iron Islands to Dorne, sent pleas, demands, offers of gold, offers of land. All wanted their own new Valyrian steel sword. Gendry studied each request, but he ignored most of them, focusing solely on the great houses. It was not about gold or favors. He had to preserve the balance. Or so he told himself when he saw the sums they offered. Lands as far as the eye could see, chests of jewels, marriage proposals to the wealthiest heirs. All worthless to him if it meant turning his craft into a mere commodity. He was forging something bigger, an idea that might hold the realm together. If he handed out these blades to anyone with enough coin, the realm would soon drown in black steel, and his carefully nurtured dream would crumble. Next came the sword for House Lannister. Some insisted House Lannister was almost ruined, that its coffers were not what they once were. But Gendry knew that gold still flowed through their veins. Lady Joy Lannister, rumored to be a distant niece of Tyrion's, was the new ruler of Casterly Rock. A cunning woman, with a clever smile and eyes like polished coins, she had garnered loyalty by promising prosperity in the West, but she was not a warrior by nature. Still, she wanted a sword that would stand as a testament to her house's endurance. Gendry forged it from a small ingot of old Valyrian steel that had supposedly once been part of Widow's Wail, though that sword itself was lost or destroyed during the wars. He folded fresh ore in with it, and hammered the mixture with methodical precision. He found himself adding references to lions in the blade's patterns, swirling filigrees that suggested a lion's mane or claws. Each blow of the hammer felt heavier this time, as though the gold of House Lannister weighed upon him. He shaped the pommel into a roaring lion's head, mouth open, fangs bared. The blade itself came out as black as night with subtle hints of red in the swirling grain, reminiscent of fresh blood. He named it Red Roar. When he rode to Casterly Rock, he was surprised by the state of the road. Though the war was over, chaos still reigned in some corners. Brigands and broken men roamed, raiding small folk. He had to fend off an ambush on the Gold Road, half a dozen men who thought to steal whatever spoils the smith was carrying. They were ill-equipped, starving, and desperate. Gendry's traveling companions, a handful of loyal guards from Storm's End, made short work of them, but Gendry found himself deeply troubled. Was this the peace they had fought for? House Lannister might hold a shining fortress, but the lands around it were hurting. He pressed on, delivering the sword to Lady Joy in a small ceremony in the Rock's audience hall. The echo of the lion's roar in her crest soared overhead, carved into pillars and walls. So the rumors were true, she mused, running a delicate hand along the swirling pattern of the blade, mesmerized by its flawless edge. You have made a new sword to rival the ancients. Perhaps it rivals them, Gendry answered, though he felt uneasy. But it is not for me to say how it compares to the swords forged in old Valyria. I only know it can cut through steel like parchment, if wielded properly. She laughed a bit. Such a treasure. My house thanks you, Lord Baratheon. May we never need to stain it with blood. A polite sentiment, but Gendry wondered how long it would last. Even if war did not come soon, he suspected there would always be battles in Westeros. He could only hope these blades would act as wards against the worst impulses of men, not as their fuel. Lady Joy insisted on hosting a lavish feast in his honor, but Gendry excused himself early, uncomfortable in the lion's den of feasting lords. He retreated to a guest chamber and spent the night pacing before the embers of a dying fire, thinking of the swords yet to be made. Returning to Storm's End, he set about forging the blade for House Baratheon, though in effect for himself. He loathed the ceremony of being called lord, yet he recognized the importance of presenting a weapon for the Stormlands. He wanted this sword to be as fierce as the storms that battered the coasts. He hammered and folded the steel relentlessly, forging it in the middle of the worst thunderstorm of the season, when lightning flashed overhead and the rain pounded the courtyard roof. Sparks flew as he worked, and he felt a primal rush coursing through him, as if the storm itself lent its power to the forging. He shaped the crossguard to resemble antlers, paying homage to the stag of House Baratheon. The blade's swirling pattern had a faint hint of gold in it, less visible than in the Lannister steel, but reminiscent of lightning flickering across a black sky. He named it Storm's Fury. Perhaps it was indulgent to craft his own sword with so much grandeur, but he felt a kinship with this blade. He would carry it himself, or bequeath it to a worthy champion. For now, it would remain sheathed at Storm's End, a testament to the craftsman who had somehow become a lord. More commissions followed, each blade a monumental task. For House Arryn, he created a slender, elegant sword that glimmered with silvered waves in its grain, lighter than the others, perfect for knights of the Vale who prized speed. For House Tully, he forged a longsword with ripples like water, its crossguard shaped like leaping trout. For House Greyjoy, he dared to mix a small amount of iron from a broken anchor chain into the forging, giving the steel a faint, salt-rusted hue in the swirling pattern, an homage to the Ironborn's ways. He shaped the pommel like a kraken's head, tentacles curling around the grip. While forging that Ironborn's sword, he journeyed across the sea to Old Volantis, seeking new knowledge from the Red Temple, rumored to hold fragments of old lore about Valyrian steel. He discovered little, only cryptic references to fire magic and prayers to R'hll lore. But on his return, he found a small nugget of raw dragon bone in a Lysini merchant's stash, a trophy once believed to have belonged to a Targaryen who traveled the east. Dragonbone was said to have properties that strengthened Valyrian steel when used in the hilt. He bought it at a ruinous cost. He knew he would need it eventually. For House Tyrell, or rather, for the new stewards of the Reach, since House Tyrell had all but perished, he did something more unusual. Lord Mathis Oakhart, chosen by King Bran to oversee the regrowth of the Reach, was a pious man, deeply thankful for the yield of the land. Gendry decided to carve the pommel from a block of living oak, treated by a secret resin so that it would never rot. He hammered the steel with an intricacy that suggested vines growing along the blade. The sword seemed alive in his hands, as if rooted in the fertile soil of the Reach. He named it Summerbloom. The forging for House Martell was more challenging still. Dorne remained distant, proud, suspicious of northern meddling. He traveled to Sunspear, feeling the weight of the desert sun on his shoulders, meeting with Prince Corn Martell, a young man with a sharp gaze and a tongue quick to mock outsiders. Yet Corrin was no fool. He recognized the gift Gendry carried. Gendry asked for a private space to forge within the palace walls, where he could incorporate local desert sands into the mix. He suspected that the swirling pattern might take on a sun-dappled effect. The heat of Dorne was punishing, but the dryness and searing desert wind seemed to help the forging process in ways he could not fully explain. When the sword was complete, he named it Spear of Dawn, as a subtle nod to the famed sword Dawn of House Dane, though this was its own creature, a black steel scimitar with a slight curve, forging something new for Martell tradition. The swirl in the steel shimmered like distant dunes in the heat, and the pommel was shaped like a rising sun. Then came House Targaryen, or what remained of it. The Targaryens had lost their throne, their dragons scattered. Some said Daenerys Targaryen was dead. Others swore she lived in exile far across the sea. In Westeros, the Targaryen name was whispered, not proclaimed. Yet, Gendry felt the presence of dragons in the forging of every blade. Valyrian steel was the blood and fire of old Valyria, intimately tied to the rise of House Targaryen. He decided that forging a Targaryen sword was essential. Even if no living Targaryen came to claim it, it would exist as a symbol, a piece of the realm's legacy. He recalled how Daenerys had recognized him as a Baratheon, legitimized him. It had been a turning point in his life. He felt a certain debt of gratitude, though he did not condone all her actions. Searching through the relics of Dragonstone, he found a broken sconce rumored to be made partly of Valyrian steel. He took its shards, mixing them with fresh steel, and a small fragment from the dragonbone he had purchased. Each strike of his hammer rang with a deeper, more resonant note this time. He felt as if some ancient power guided his arm, shaping the blade with a fierceness beyond mortal artistry. When he was done, the sword's swirling pattern caught the light like faint tongues of flame dancing beneath the surface. Its crossguard flared in a dragon's wing motif, and the pommel was fashioned from that piece of dragon bone, carved to resemble an open dragon's maw. He named it Heartfire. When the time came, if a Targaryen heir emerged with a rightful claim, Gendry would present it to them. Until then, it would rest in the vaults of Storm's End, a silent testament to the realm's most storied house. When all was said and done, each great house had or was promised its own blade of new Valyrian steel. The realm buzzed with talk of these weapons. Some believed they would usher in an era of balance and mutual respect. Others predicted they would spark fresh conflicts, as old grudges found new reasons to strike now that no house could claim superiority in arms. The question of who held the advantage became muddled. Perhaps it lay in cunning alliances, in trade, in knowledge, rather than in the forging of swords. Gendry hoped that making each house equal in Valyrian steel might cool the ambitions that so often led to bloodshed. Yet forging the swords was only part of the story. The real test would come in how the lords and ladies used them, or refused to use them. In the months following the distribution of the swords, Gendry traveled extensively, checking on the realm's condition. He found that bandits still prowled the roads. Small folk still suffered from the aftershocks of war. The lords in their castles grew complacent behind walls, enthralled by the novelty of their new black steel swords, but slow to address the hardships outside. Gendry began to suspect that no single symbol, no matter how magnificent, could cure the ills of Westeros. He was a smith, a man of the forge, not a savior. He found himself invited to a grand council in Riverrun, orchestrated by Lord Edmure Tully, who sought to address trade disputes and boundary disagreements among the great houses. Riverrun's halls teemed with envoys from North, West, Reach and Dorne, each bearing the new sword that Gendry had crafted for them, or else brandishing it in some elaborate display. The owners of the swords were proud, preening like cocks in a yard. Gendry moved among them quietly, accompanied by a few of his loyal guards, keeping Storm's fury sheathed at his side. He noticed how certain lords eyed one another's blades, as if comparing patterns, measuring length and sharpness. There was envy in their eyes, but also a grudging respect. The equalizing factor was there. None could claim to hold the last or the finest Valyrian steel sword. They all had one. Just one. The council began with petty squabbles about stolen sheep and contested farmland, then escalated to arguments over shipping lanes, with the Ironborn threatening to blockade Lannister ports if certain debts were not paid. Gendry watched from the sidelines, frustrated by the arrogance on display. The swords might be a deterrent to war, but they had not unified the realm in friendship. The tensions were still there, simmering. The presence of these new Valyrian blades seemed only to keep them from drawing steel at every harsh word. Now, at least, they hesitated. Late on the third day of negotiations, an argument nearly turned violent. Lord Harren Manderly from White Harbor clashed with Lord Paramount Grafton from the Vale over shipping tolls. Voices rose, fists pounded tables, and the swords' hilts were gripped in anger. For a moment the entire hall held its breath. Gendry glimpsed the shine of newly forged black steel sliding free of a scabbard. If one blow was struck, blood would be spilled, and the entire council might degenerate into chaos. But neither dared take that first swing. They each possessed unstoppable steel, each equally matched. With a snarl, they resheathed their blades. The council continued, bruised and shaken, but still talking. Afterward, Gendry slipped out to the battlements of Riverrun. Dusk was falling, painting the sky with shades of purple and red. He leaned on the parapet brooding. The quiet rush of the Red Fork below reminded him of forging, constant, patient effort, shaping the land. He wondered if his gift was enough. He did not hear the approach of Lady Sansa Stark until she was at his side. She was no longer the frightened girl he had known briefly in King's Landing. She was the Lady of Winterfell, sister to King Bran, though the North now stood largely independent. She had not come to the council in any official capacity, but had been traveling through the Riverlands to oversee matters of her own. She wore a dark cloak trimmed in fur, and her red hair caught the fading light. "You look troubled," she said quietly. Gendry nodded. He found he could not hide his thoughts from her. Something about her composure made people speak honestly. "I thought giving them all the same sword would help bring peace, but they're still bickering, still angry, still looking for ways to outmaneuver each other." Sansa looked out over the river, her eyes distant. "Peace in Westeros is never simple. We have scars going back thousands of years, but your swords have done something important. Now, well, have they? He let out a heavy sigh. What good is a sword if men only use it to posture and threaten? She studied him for a moment. It's not just a sword. It's a symbol that no house need fear another, simply because one wields something so rare and deadly. That's a start, Gendry. If they all have the same advantage, perhaps they'll fight less. He remembered how his father, Robert Baratheon, had once wielded a warhammer. The hammer that smashed Prince Rhaegar. Back then, the realm was divided over who had the superior claim to the throne, who had the power of dragons, or the power of steel. Now at least the playing field was more level in that regard. Still, Gendry felt an ache in his chest. I hope so, he said. But I can't help thinking that maybe I'd made a mistake, that forging more weapons only invites more violence. Sansa turned slightly, her gaze flicking to the sword at his hip. Weapons themselves are not evil or good. They are tools. The hearts that wield them, those shape their use. If you had to choose, would you rather have left the secrets of Valyrian steel buried forever? Malnutrup. He was silent. He thought of the satisfaction of forging, the moment the steel sang under his hammer, the swirl of patterns that held a piece of his own spirit. He thought of the White Walkers, how nearly unstoppable they were. The entire realm might need Valyrian steel again someday, if some new threat emerged. Finally, he shook his head. No, I don't think so. She gave a small nod, turning back to the view. The sky was nearly dark now, the first stars glittering overhead. My brother sees many possibilities, Sansa said softly. He saw the day you forged that first dagger. He sees paths in which the realm crumbles, and paths in which it prospers. Your swords tip the balance toward a future of cooperation, if only slightly. That might be enough. They stood quietly for a time, the hush of evening settling around them. Gendry thought of how naive he must seem, wanting to save Westeros with hammered steel. But no dream was too large, he supposed, if it could help even a fraction. The following day saw the council conclude with tense accords. Treaties were signed. Debts were restructured. No one left entirely happy, but at least no swords had actually clashed. Gendry took it as a small victory. In the months that followed, he devoted himself to perfecting his craft and ensuring the swords he had distributed remained cared for. He traveled widely, acting almost like a wandering blacksmith again, except now he was a lord in name. He had no taste for lording over feasts or counting taxes. Instead, he visited the Vale to check on how House Aaron's blade, Sky's Song, was holding up. He found that it had rarely left its scabbard, but it had gained a near-mythic status among the knights who guarded the Eyrie. He journeyed to the Iron Islands, spending a harrowing sea voyage to observe the upkeep of Sea Reaver, the Greyjoy blade. On Pike's cold, wind-swept ramparts, he felt the salt spray lash his face as he watched a group of Ironborn stand in awe of the black steel. They bragged about how no enemy ship would stand against them now, yet they also seemed uncertain. If every foe had Valyrian steel, what advantage was left to them? That question dogged Gendry. The realm had always marched forward on the principle that one side had to be stronger than the other. A house that had the largest army or the deadliest weapon could dominate the rest. Now that advantage was blurred. Perhaps that was a good thing. Perhaps it would encourage them to find strength in unity, or to outdo each other in more peaceful arenas. But he worried, too, that it might push them to seek other, darker means of supremacy. Poison, treachery, alliances with foreign powers. Even the forging of new swords might not keep the peace if the hearts of men turned toward cruelty. He had many late-night talks with Davos Seaworth, one of the few counselors he trusted. Davos had grown old, hair graying, but his mind was sharp as ever, and his common sense remained unmatched. Over cups of mulled wine in Storm's End's great hall, they discussed the future of Westeros, the ongoing repairs to battered towns, the stubborn pride of certain lords. Gendry confessed his doubts. Davos gave him a kindly smile. "You've done something remarkable, lad," Davos said, still calling Gendry lad, though Gendry was now well into adulthood. "Bringing that secret back to the world. But never forget, steel doesn't rule men. Kings, lords, or councils do. And if the people are hurting, no fancy sword will fix that." "Away. I know," Gendry sighed. "It's just... sometimes I wonder if I should have done more to help the small folk directly. instead of forging swords for the highborn. Davos shrugged. Who says you can't do both? You're a lord whether you like it or not. You have the power to order roads repaired, to feed your people, to build a new shipyard, to restore trade. Maybe your swords are a gift to the lords, but your heart should be with the folk who have nothing. That spurred Gendry to action. Over the next year, he took advantage of his newfound status and relationships to broker trade agreements that would send grain from the Reach to the Stormlands and the Crownlands, ensuring that peasants had enough to eat. He improved roads connecting Storm's End to King's Landing, hiring the same men who once lurked as bandits, giving them honest work. He expanded Storm's End's small harbor, building new ships to encourage commerce. All the while, his forge remained active, though he limited the forging of new Valyrian steel to maintenance of the existing swords and the occasional special project. He refused to flood the realm with them. That would have the same destructive effect as leaving them lost forever. But he did not hide the process entirely. He made sure that a small group of apprentices learned the forging steps, though he kept certain key details to himself. And then a shadow from the east arrived, rocking the realm, rumors of a dragon flying toward Pentos. A black beast, grown large. Some insisted it was Drogon, Daenerys' last living dragon. Others claimed it was a new terror hatched in the ruins of Valyria. Stories poured in of entire caravans burned to ash, of distant villages offering tribute in fear. The free cities trembled, unsure whether to slay the dragon or appease it. Westeros was far from these troubles, but the memory of dragons scorching King's Landing was fresh. The great houses convened a hurried meeting in the capital. Gendry traveled there as well, Storm's fury at his side. He found the city bustling with panic and speculation. Could the dragon cross the narrow sea, searching for a new conquest? Some lords insisted that if it came they would slay it, brandishing their new Valyrian steel swords. Others whispered that a single dragon could lay waste to entire armies, swords or no swords. King Bran sat in council, listening to the frantic arguments. His face was impassive. Some said he knew the truth already, that his visions showed him where the dragon would go. Finally he spoke, his voice calm as ever. We will not provoke it. A raven is to be sent to Pentos requesting word of any sightings. If the dragon heads for Westeros, we will prepare. Lord Baratheon, are the swords you forged up to the task of slaying a dragon, should it come to that? War. Gendry's stomach turned at the thought. He glanced around at the lords who held those swords so proudly. Valyrian steel is strong, your grace, and legend says it can pierce dragon scales more easily than common steel. But a single man with a sword is still no match for a dragon in open battle. That would take cunning, and luck, or perhaps a ballista. Nay. Whispers broke out again, lords recalling Qyburn scorpions that once hunted Daenerys dragons. Some advocated building more war machines. Others worried about the cost, the effort, the risk of provoking the beast. Through it all, King Bran watched, as though he already knew how it would unfold. In the weeks that followed, the tension did not lessen. Gendry returned to Storm's End, feeling an uneasy weight in the pit of his stomach. He had forged these swords in the hope of unifying the realm, and now a new threat loomed, one that might overshadow any petty squabbles. Had all his work been in vain? Or would these swords stand as the last line of defense if the dragon came to roost on Westerosi shores? Ravens flew back and forth from Pentos to King's Landing. Reports claimed the dragon was never seen more than a few times, devouring sheep and goats, then vanishing into the wilderness. Some believed it might be wounded or ill, seeking solitude. Others believed it was scouting for its mother, if Daenerys Targaryen still lived, and that the rightful queen might someday return. The realm teetered on the edge of panic. But slowly, the sightings stopped. No new fires were reported, and the caravans resumed their routes. People began to relax, to doubt the tales, to dismiss them as exaggerations. But Gendry never forgot the lesson. At any moment a threat beyond imagination could appear. Swords alone would not save them, but he was glad they existed. It was better to face the unknown with a blade in hand than with empty fists. Life in Westeros settled into a cautious peace. The roads grew safer. Harvests improved, thanks to an unusual streak of mild summers. Trade flourished. The lords and ladies, each possessing a new Valyrian steel heirloom, engaged in more subtle politicking. Duels still happened now and then. Hot-headed knights were eager to test the black steel's mettle. But for the most part, large-scale conflicts did not ignite. The memory of the long night was too recent, the fear of renewed devastation too strong. Perhaps, just perhaps, Gendry's dream of forging unity had taken root, aided by the stark knowledge that these swords were not illusions. Each house had power, so none dared make a rash move. Gendry found solace in the simpler tasks of forging tools, horseshoes and nails for reconstruction efforts. He spent time among common folk, listening to their stories, hearing how the new roads and better trade were improving their lives. He labored side by side with his apprentices, teaching them how to temper steel for good plowshares, how to mend broken fences so peasants might keep their livestock secure. He discovered a surprising sense of contentment in these humble tasks. The realm seemed stable, for now. One autumn evening, as the sun set over the horizon in a blaze of orange, a raven arrived at Storm's End carrying a summons with the royal seal. Gendry read it in the courtyard, the wind tugging at the edges of the parchment. King Bran requested his presence in King's Landing, in a matter of utmost importance. Gendry set out the next morning. The road was in decent repair, and he rode with minimal escort, trusting in the relative safety of the Crown lands. When he arrived at the Red Keep, the atmosphere in the courtyard was subdued yet tense. Courtiers hurried about with anxious faces. Gendry was led to the throne room, now less grand than in the days of the Mad King, or even Cersei Lannister, but still imposing. King Bran sat upon the Iron Throne, what remained of it after the Dragonfire, reforged to some extent, yet missing many of the original swords that had melted away. Ser Brienne stood beside him as ever, a silent sentinel. To Gendry's surprise, many of the great houses had representatives present. He recognized Lady Joy Lannister, the newly styled Warden of the West, holding Red Roar at her side. Prince Corn Martell of Dorne stood near the back, his black scimitar, Spear of Dawn, resting in an ornate sheath. Even the Greyjoys had sent a delegate, accompanied by Sea Reaver. The moment Gendry stepped forward, he noticed the hush that fell over the assembly. They were all looking at him. Or rather, at Storm's fury sheathed at his hip. King Bran's quiet voice echoed in the vast throne room. Lord Gendry Baratheon, you have brought Valyrian steel to each great house. Now, we call upon your expertise once more. Gendry bowed, his heart pounding. Your Grace, I'm at your service. What is the matter? Bran's eyes seemed to gleam with otherworldly insight. A new power stirs in Essos, slavers from the remnants of the old Volantene families, who have begun forging alliances with mercenary bands. They threaten to destabilize the trade routes that Westeros relies upon. Rumors say they have somehow obtained a cache of black steel, either stolen from our realm or forged by their own twisted means. We do not know if it is truly Valyrian steel or a cunning imitation. But if it is genuine, if they have discovered your secret or a variant thereof, it could tip the balance in the east. We must prepare. Now you are. A ripple of shock went through the assembled lords. Gendry felt an icy chill course through him. Could it be that someone in Essos was replicating his method, or had discovered a parallel secret? The forging of new Valyrian steel had always been believed lost, except for the fragmentary knowledge Gendry had painstakingly pieced together. If these slavers had such steel, it might presage a new tide of violence across the narrow sea, and eventually, it could spill into Westeros. What would you have me do, Your Grace? Gendry asked. Bran inclined his head. We need more knowledge. You alone have the skill to discern true Valyrian steel from mere forgeries. We would ask you to travel to Braavos, to meet with representatives from the Iron Bank and the Faceless Men, if they will deign to speak with us. They have eyes and ears across Essos. Learn what you can about this new power. See if these rumors of black steel are true. If they are, we must discover how they obtained it, and stop them from making more. Namesh. It was a grave request. Gendry thought of the dangers that might lie across the sea. He was no spy master, no cunning manipulator of intrigue, but he did know steel better than any living man. If the realm needed him to confirm or deny the existence of new Valyrian steel in Essos, he could do it. Still, the idea of confronting slavers, some of whom might wield black steel swords of their own, felt like staring into a forge blaze too bright to bear. He looked around the throne room. The delegates from each great house stood, silent, but watchful. They might have to send their own forces to the east if war threatened. For the first time, Gendry truly sensed the scope of the legacy he had unleashed. The forging of Valyrian steel was not just a boon for Westeros. It was a game-changing knowledge that could shape the fate of nations. If it spread unchecked, if it fell into wicked hands, the consequences could be dire. He exhaled slowly. I will go, Your Grace. I will do all in my power to learn the truth. King Bran nodded. Thank you, Lord Baratheon. Prepare yourself. This mission will not be an easy one, but the realm is grateful, and all the great houses stand behind you. As Gendry left the throne room, the weight of the new swords he had forged seemed heavier than ever. He had tried to do good by sharing the steel among the great houses, hoping to prevent one from dominating the rest. But now the knowledge might be slipping overseas, perhaps stolen or rediscovered by men who would use it to enslave. If that was true, then the forging of black steel would become a race, a battle of knowledge and cunning. That night, Gendry gathered his small council of trusted allies in Storm's End's capital chambers, which he had temporarily taken over in King's Landing. Davos was there, as well as a few loyal guards. They pored over what little information they had. Rumors from sailors, Braavosi whispers, references to a group calling themselves the Sons of the Flame, who claimed to have harnessed the old magic of Valyria. Their base was said to be near Newkeys, or perhaps further south. Nobody knew for sure. The only certain thing was that they had begun capturing villages, reinstituting the practice of slavery that Daenerys Targaryen had worked so hard to abolish. Freedmen were disappearing, entire families forced back into chains, and there were tales of black-bladed overseers punishing any who resisted. The next day, Gendry boarded a sturdy ship bound for Braavos, accompanied by Davos and a small retinue. Storm's fury hung at his belt while the rest of his men carried more ordinary weapons. As they sailed across the narrow sea, Gendry stood at the prow, thinking of how his journey had started. Once, he had been a bastard boy, forging common armor in King's Landing. Now, he was a lord, forging legendary blades, and sailing to Braavos on a mission to preserve the fragile peace he had helped create. The sea breeze ruffled his hair, and he felt the swirl of tension in his gut like the swirling patterns in Valyrian steel. Braavos greeted them with the towering Titan, its immense statue glowering over the harbor. The city was a labyrinth of canals, bridges, and tall houses leaning over the waterways. Gendry had never liked Braavos's gloom, but he respected its wealth and power. The Iron Bank was said to have toppled kings who failed to repay debts, and the faceless men were rumored to shape destinies with silent assassinations. If any city in the world could confirm the existence of black steel in the east, it was Braavos. Davos guided him through the city, weaving through narrow alleys and across tiny arched bridges. They came to the Iron Bank's austere edifice, where they were made to wait in a cold antechamber, surrounded by marble floors and pillars. Finally, a banker in dark robes received them. He had thin features and a calculating gleam in his eyes. Yes, we have heard these rumors, the banker said in a clipped tone, after Davos explained their purpose. We are concerned. War in the East disrupts trade. The Iron Bank finds conflict unprofitable unless we have a stake. We have done business with certain parties who claim to offer valuable commodities, possibly including steel of a special nature. Gendry leaned forward. Are they forging it themselves, or is it stolen from Westeros? The banker's face remained neutral. We have not yet determined the provenance. But they do possess steel of remarkable quality. We have received small samples as collateral for certain loans. Nay. A chill ran down Gendry's spine. So it was real. Where are they based? The banker steepled his fingers. New guys, to start with. But they may have outposts further south, near the ruins of Old Valyria. They claim to have discovered a hidden forge among the smoking ruins, aided by sorcerers skilled in blood magic. He said it casually, as if discussing interest rates, but Gendry felt his stomach churn. Blood magic was not a rumor to be taken lightly. He thought of the red woman who once leached his own blood, of shadows that killed in the darkness. Davos frowned. We have reason to believe these black steel weapons could threaten the stability of Westeros as well. The banker shrugged. All the more reason for the Iron Bank to remain neutral and watch. We stand to profit from either side if conflict arises. However, if you wish to pay for information, we might be persuaded to provide more details. A flash of anger flared in Gendry, but Davos placed a hand on his shoulder, calming him. The Iron Bank had always been mercenary in its dealings. They cared only for gold, not the moral implications of slavery or black steel. Gendry inhaled sharply. Fine, name your price. It cost them more than half the gold they had brought, but eventually they purchased enough intelligence to form a plan. The slavers, calling themselves the Sons of the Flame, had set up a network across the Gulf of Grief. They boasted of forging, or acquiring black steel swords in the tradition of Valyria. Rumors spoke of a hidden fortress near the Smoking Sea, where they carried out twisted rituals. Gendry and Davos concluded that they would need to travel south, discreetly, to see with their own eyes. Davos was wary. This is no place for a lord of Westeros, especially not one with your skill. If they know who you are, they might try to capture you, force you to reveal how to forge Valyrian steel. Gendry grimaced. Then we'll have to be careful. But if they truly have black steel, I need to know how. Whether they've duplicated my methods, or discovered an even darker secret. Nah. They arranged passage on a merchant vessel heading for Moraine, then would continue by smaller boats or land caravans toward the rumored fortress. Along the way, they encountered refugees, former slaves, battered and ragged, fleeing south or west, telling tales of cruel overseers brandishing swords as dark as midnight, swords that cut through flesh like butter. Gendry's worst fears were confirmed. The Sons of the Flame apparently had enough black steel to arm their enforcers. Where were they getting it? Had one of Gendry's apprentices betrayed him, or had they uncovered the knowledge in the cursed ruins of Valyria? Traveling under assumed names, Gendry and Davos pressed onward. Days bled into weeks, the heat intensifying as they approached the scorched lands near the Valyrian Peninsula. Rumors of slave raids abounded. They saw columns of smoke on the horizon. At night, Gendry sometimes dreamt of the clang of his hammer on the forge, but the steel turned into living shadow, writhing in agony. He wondered if forging such power had awakened something best left sleeping. Finally, they hired a local guide who claimed to know where the Sons of the Flame had their main outpost. They traveled by night through charred wastelands, the ground brittle underfoot. The air smelled of sulfur and ash. The Smoking Sea was visible in the distance, a dark expanse where volcanic activity still bubbled. Gendry felt a heavy dread pressing on him. This was the cradle of Valyrian magic, the place that had birthed dragons and shaped the world. If there was any place the forging of black steel could be twisted by black arts, it was here. They reached a ruined fortress perched on a crag overlooking the sea. Broken towers jutted into the sky. Torchlight flickered in windows, indicating occupation. From their hiding place among jagged rocks, Gendry peered at the gate. Armed men patrolled, carrying swords that gleamed with an unnatural dark sheen. He recognized the swirl in the blade of one guard, even from a distance. It was Valyrian steel, or close enough to be indistinguishable. How many do you suppose they have? Davos muttered. Too many, Gendry whispered. We can't take them head on. They observed for hours, watching supply wagons come and go, hearing the distant clang of metal on metal. Smoke rose from within, as though a forge was active. Gendry's heart pounded. Someone was forging black steel behind those walls, likely with enslaved labor, possibly with blood sacrifice fueling the fire. How else could they replicate the lost art so quickly in such quantity? Night fell, and the patrols thinned. Gendry decided he had to sneak closer, to see the forge. Davos protested, but Gendry insisted. This was why he had come all this way, to learn the truth. Armed with Storm's fury, he slipped through a broken portion of the outer wall, creeping past sleeping guards. The fortress interior was a labyrinth of half-collapsed corridors. He followed the sound of hammers striking an anvil, picking his way through rubble. Eventually, he peered into a cavernous chamber lit by a roaring furnace. He froze at the sight. A monstrous forge dominated the chamber, fueled not just by coal, but by something that crackled and hissed with greenish sparks. Perhaps wildfire, or some chemical mixture. Hooded figures chanted in a guttural language, forming a circle around a helpless captive bound in chains. Blood trickled from the captive's arms, running into channels carved in the stone floor, funneling toward the forge's base. A massive anvil stood at the center where a red-robed smith hammered a piece of metal that glowed with an uncanny light. As Gendry watched, he saw the swirl of Valyrian steel forming, the pattern twisting unnaturally, as if infused with the captive's lifeblood. A wave of nausea rolled through him. Blood, magic. That was how they were forging so quickly, so effectively. They were fueling the steel with living souls. A scream tore from the captive, echoing in the chamber. The hooded figures only chanted louder, and the smith raised the glowing blade, quenching it in a basin of dark liquid that steamed in a vile cloud. Gendry realized that these men were not simply forging steel, they were forging atrocity. Every blade created here was stained with the agony of slaves. The swirl in the steel was not only reminiscent of the old Valyrian methods, it was a perversion, an abomination. Rage welled up within him. He wanted to burst into the chamber to stop this madness. But he was alone, outnumbered. He knew that if he confronted them now, he would die, and the knowledge they wielded would remain. Yet how could he walk away knowing what was happening? That black steel swords like these would be used to terrorize and enslave countless innocents? He clenched his fists, fighting the urge to rush in. Reason won out, if only barely. He slipped away, returning to where Davos waited in a dark corner of the fortress. He recounted what he had seen, voice trembling with suppressed fury. Davos' face went pale, and he nodded grimly. We can't fight them alone. We must return to Westeros and warn the king, the great houses. They must unite, or these slavers will grow unstoppable. Gendry looked back at the forge's glow reflecting on the walls. He felt tears sting his eyes, tears of anger and shame. He had reawakened the forging of Valyrian steel, hoping to unify Westeros. Now it was being used for unspeakable cruelty. In that moment he realized that knowledge, once let loose, could be twisted in ways he never imagined. He swallowed hard, his voice low. We'll go back, and then the realm will have to decide how to answer this. Either we act together, or we watch Essos burn, and perhaps us as well. They fled the fortress under cover of darkness, escaping by the slimmest margin when a patrol nearly spotted them. Their guide led them through blackened gullies until they found the coast. There, they bribed a fisherman to take them across the water to a safer port. The entire journey back to Westeros was a blur of tension and grief. Gendry was silent, lost in thought, replaying that terrible scene in the forge chamber. He had hammered steel with his own sweat and blood, but never like that. Never with another's life forced into the metal. When they finally arrived in King's Landing, Gendry wasted no time in seeking an audience with King Bran and the assembled lords. Grim-faced, he told them all, Lannister, Martell, Greyjoy, Arryn, Tully, even the new guardians of the Reach. He described the hidden fortress, the blood-soaked rituals, the twisted swords of black steel. Gasps and angry murmurs filled the council hall. King Bran's voice was grave. It seems we face a threat unlike any we have known. The Sons of the Flame hold a mirror to what could have been if Valyrian steel was forged without conscience. The lords looked at one another, fear and determination mingling on their faces. Some asked why they should risk men in gold to fight slavers across the sea. Others pointed out that if these slavers grew strong enough, they could invade Westeros or strangle its trade routes. Gendry appealed to their honor. We gave each great house a blade, hoping to foster unity. Now that unity is needed more than ever, to prevent an evil that could spread across the world. The debate was fierce. Some insisted on sending an army to Essos, others recommended a naval blockade, still others urged caution. Gendry stood at the center, feeling the press of eyes upon him. Storm's fury hung at his side, a reminder of the oath he had made to protect the realm with his forging. Finally, Sansa Stark, there to represent the North's interests, spoke with a clear, commanding tone. We faced the Night King together when the dead threatened us all. Now, a different evil rises, fueled by twisted steel and slavery. If we do not stop it, who will? Can we remain idle while innocent lives are tormented and forced into bondage? One by one the lords nodded, albeit with varying degrees of reluctance. King Bran concluded, We shall gather a fleet and an expeditionary force, with representatives from each great house. Lord Gendry Baratheon, your insight will be vital. We will cross the narrow sea, locate the Sons of the Flame, and put an end to their atrocities. So it was decided. And thus began a new chapter in the tale of Gendry Baratheon, blacksmith Lord. He had sought to unify Westeros by forging Valyrian steel for every great house. Now, the fate of that realm and perhaps of Essos, would hinge on whether those swords could stand against a cruel reflection of his craft, a monstrous forging powered by blood and chains. In the days that followed, ships were prepared. Knights polished their armor, archers fletched their arrows, sailors loaded supplies. Gendry oversaw the forging of additional weapons, though not of the black steel variety. He refused to create more Valyrian blades for this campaign, not wanting to escalate the madness. The great houses already had enough to hold their own. Together they would sail to Essos, traveling beyond the horizon to face enemies who thought to twist the knowledge of Valyria for evil. One late afternoon, as Gendry stood on a pier in King's Landing, watching cargo being hoisted onto a sleek galley, he felt a presence at his shoulder. He turned to see Arya Stark. Her hair was cropped short, her expression keen and knowing, as if she had seen the world's secrets. She had come and gone from Westeros, rumored to be wandering the seas, exploring unknown lands. Now she had returned, perhaps because the winds of fate called her here. "Off on another adventure?" she asked, a faint smirk on her lips. "You could say that," Gendry replied, a small smile touching his own. Despite everything, seeing her face gave him a sense of warmth. "It's not one I'm looking forward to, though." She glanced at the ships, the armed men. "You're going to fight slavers with black steel." He nodded. "They've perverted the forging process with blood magic. It has to be stopped." Arya studied him. In her eyes he read understanding, and a hint of pride. "Once, you were just a boy with a hammer, making armor in a smithy. Now you're leading an expedition across the sea, forging swords that shape the fate of kingdoms." Now, he felt a pang of nostalgia, recalling the times they had shared, escaping the gold cloaks, enduring the brotherhood without banners, the moment of vulnerability when he gave her that crude helm. How different their lives had become. "We've both traveled a long road," he said. She nodded, a wry grin on her lips. "I'll come with you." He blinked. "Will you?" Arya shrugged. "Sounds more interesting than sitting around King's Landing or wandering aimlessly. I've never liked slavers." "Wah." Gendry found himself smiling. He was glad to have her by his side, a reminder of all he fought for, the living, breathing souls who deserved a life free from tyranny. With Arya aboard, he felt a flicker of hope despite the uncertainty of the mission. The fleet set sail at dawn a few days later, banners snapping in the brisk wind. House Stark's direwolf, House Lannister's lion, House Martell's sun spear, House Greyjoy's kraken, House Baratheon's stag, all emblazoned on ship sails, a united force crossing the narrow sea. Gendry stood on the prow of the lead galley, Storm's fury sheathed at his hip, thinking of the precarious balance he had forged in Westeros. Now that unity would be tested on a foreign shore against an evil that showed how knowledge could be twisted into cruelty. Despite the gravity of the journey, Gendry felt a strange surge of determination. He had started as a bastard blacksmith with no name, and now he carried the hopes of a realm. If it was up to him, he would ensure that his craft, his gift to each great house, would not be overshadowed by the sins of the Sons of the Flame. He would stand against them, hammer in hand if need be, forging a path toward a future where the black steel might truly symbolize unity rather than terror. The sun rose higher, and the ships turned south by southeast, sails billowing. The waters of the narrow sea stretched out ahead, reflecting the dawn light in rippling gold. Gendry took a deep breath, tasting the salt on his tongue, and thought of how the hammer fell upon steel, shaping it blow by blow. Westeros had been shaped by the swords he had forged, for good or ill. Now he would shape a new chapter beyond the sea. And though no one could predict the final outcome of that confrontation, how many lives might be lost, how many swords might shatter, one truth remained. For the first time in centuries, every great house of Westeros held the legendary steel of Valyria in its hands, thanks to a blacksmith who once dreamed of a better realm. The rest would unfold on distant shores, as the forging of destiny continued beneath the same sun and stars that had once witnessed the doom of Valyria. If Gendry had learned one lesson from the forge, it was that steel could be bent, molded and sharpened, but it always carried the imprint of the fires that made it. Perhaps the same was true of men and nations. They had all been scorched by war, hammered by loss, tempered by hopes of peace. Whether they emerged stronger or shattered would depend on how they wielded the gifts they had been given. And in that, Gendry still had faith, for he had seen men and women stand against the darkness before, forging their own courage like the greatest of steels. He turned from the prow, heading below to consult charts and muster his resolve. Overhead, gulls cried in the morning air. In the east, clouds gathered on the horizon, promising storms to come. But the fleet pressed on, undaunted. The swords of Westeros would meet the black steel of the Sons of the Flame, and the fate of 2 continents might rest on how they clashed. Yet in Gendry's heart, the hammer still rang, forging hope from the fires of determination. A hope that, this time, the steel of unity would prevail. Gendry woke at dawn to the soft rocking of the galley and the distant creak of ropes overhead. Sunlight filtered through the narrow windows of the captain's cabin, casting flickers of gold across the polished table. He rose from his bunk with a groan, every muscle stiff from another night of uneasy sleep. While he might have dozed in a lord's bed at Storm's End, here at sea he found comfort only in the constant murmur of the waves, an echo of the forge's steady rhythm in his mind. One day bled into the next in this journey across the narrow sea, but now their destination lay far behind the usual routes of trade. They were heading south, into waters that few Westerosi ships dared to sail, drawn by the rumor of a vile threat that demanded an answer. He splashed cold water on his face, trying to banish the dreams that had plagued him in the night. Visions of blood-smeared anvils, tortured slaves, black steel swirling with cruelty. Ever since he had witnessed the Sons of the Flame forging swords with the aid of blood magic, his sleep had been haunted by the memory of that bound captive and the glow of sorcerous flames. He wondered if he might ever lift a hammer again without feeling that sense of revulsion. Even so, he had not lost his resolve. The knowledge that these slavers were repeating and perverting the forging of Valyrian steel only made him more determined to stop them. On deck, he found Davos Seaworth conferring with the captain near the wheel. The old knight offered Gendry a tired smile. "Morning, lad. Or should I say, my lord. Seems we'll be landing in a day or 2 if the winds hold." "Nay in." Gendry gave a low grunt of acknowledgement. Though he was indeed a lord, he still felt more comfortable simply being Gendry, the blacksmith. "Has the horizon changed at all?" he asked, scanning the water. The sea stretched in every direction, its surface ruffled by the breeze. Gulls circled overhead, their cries lost in the wind. Beyond them, all was endless blue, the line between sky and water blurred by the hazy light. "Not yet," Davos said, "but the captain assures me we're making good time. We'll swing around the coast beyond Meereen, then anchor where we can. Word is that the slavers have already retaken some outer settlements. The city might be threatened soon." "Nay." Gendry laid a hand on the railing and gazed past the flutter of sails. "We'll do what we can, but if the Sons of the Flame truly have the numbers we suspect, and if they've spread their black steel among their ranks, we won't be enough alone. We'll have to find allies, possibly some of Daenerys' old supporters still rule in Meereen." Davos nodded. "Aye. Or what's left of them. Many turned to new ways after she left, and there's been chaos over the years. But if they see Westerosi banners and hear we're here to stop a new slave trade, we might win their ear. And ye may. And if not, we continue south," Gendry said, half under his breath. "Back to that fortress by the smoking sea, one way or another." He felt the weight of Storm's fury at his hip, the Valyrian steel sword he'd forged for House Baratheon. He had crafted it in the hope it would symbolize strength and justice, but on this expedition, it was simply a weapon he might be forced to use, against men whose blades were forged by blood. The swirl of black steel beneath the surface of Storm's fury had once filled him with pride in his craft. Now it reminded him of the heavy cost of knowledge, how easily it could be bent to evil ends. They were not alone on the high seas. 6 ships flew the sigils of Westeros' great houses. House Lannister had sent a galley boasting a golden lion prow and a deck bristling with archers. House Martell's vessel cut through the waves under a sunspear banner. Even the Ironborn had contributed a longship, though their presence was less about altruism and more about seizing any chance for glory and plunder. Somewhere among them sailed Arya Stark, likely perched on a rail with her short hair teased by the wind, watching the horizon with wary eyes. Gendry found her later as he made his rounds along the ships via small rowing skiffs. He wanted to check in with each contingent, ensure that the short supply of fresh water and rations was holding. Arya was standing on the deck of the Martell ship, flanked by a pair of Dornish soldiers who looked a bit uneasy around her. She wore simple leathers, her stance relaxed yet coiled like a cat ready to spring. "Any news?" she asked when Gendry stepped aboard, nodding to the oarsman who'd ferried him. He offered a quick smile. "We're a day or two out from Meereen. If the currents favor us, we'll reach it sooner." Her eyes flicked around the deck, where Dornish soldiers busied themselves polishing weapons or tending to supplies. "I don't suppose you'd mind if I took one of the smaller boats out later, just to scout?" Gendry studied her a moment. "We should stay together. These waters might not be safe." Arya's lips quirked with amusement as though safe hardly mattered to her. "Don't worry, I'd slip back before nightfall, but you're probably right. It's better not to split the fleet. We don't know what lurks out there." He nodded, grateful for her caution. "There's no telling if the Sons of the Flame have ships. We've heard rumors they mostly move by land, but who knows? If they've grown powerful enough, they might have seized some vessels or bribed corsairs to their cause." "Nay." Arya folded her arms. "Then let's hope we're quicker." Gendry exchanged a few words with Prince Corin Martell, who leaned against the ship's mast in a languid pose, sipping from a jeweled goblet. Corin was no fool, but he enjoyed projecting an air of careless superiority, wearing loose silks of orange and crimson. In the months since Gendry had forged the scimitar spear of dawn for House Martell, Corin had grown proud of it, and the blade now rested at his side. "How fares our blacksmith lord?" Corin asked with a lazy smirk. "Hoping to test your steel against these foreign slavers." "I'd rather not have to, but if we must, we must," Gendry said. "No word from your scouts?" "Some whisper that the Sons of the Flame hold secret outposts all along the coast. Others say they're biding their time near the ruins of New Guise, waiting for the perfect moment to expand. Fear can twist rumors faster than we can track them, but we'll see soon enough." Gendry left him to his wine, crossing to the railing with Arya. For a moment, they gazed at the horizon in silence, the wind catching the lines of the sails, the salted tang in the air. It felt oddly peaceful, even though Gendry knew a storm awaited them ashore. Arya said softly, "I've traveled these waters before. After the wars, I wanted to see what lay beyond Westeros. I visited Braavos, but never this far south. We used to hear stories that Daenerys Targaryen had freed Meereen from its chains. Now we're hearing it's under threat once more. If the breaker of chains saw this, she'd be furious." "Whoa, furious enough to burn cities again?" Gendry asked quietly, unable to hide a certain wariness. They both remembered King's Landing, even if Gendry had not been in the city when the worst of the flames descended. "I suppose we're here to ensure it doesn't come to that. We can't let these slavers have free reign." She nodded, her gaze distant. "Exactly. The old ways keep creeping back. No matter how many times you think they've died, someone's always waiting to profit from suffering." He felt the truth of that in his bones. He'd seen it in the forging chamber of the Sons of the Flame, the savage ritual that twisted the very essence of steel. And so they continued south, each day bringing them closer to the shifting dunes and scorched plains of Essos that bordered the slavers' Bay region. Seagulls gave way to larger seabirds, their cries harsher. The winds grew warmer, carrying dust and the faint smell of spices or rot depending on the direction. Finally, on the morning of the 9th day since they had left Braavos, they spotted the skyline of Meereen. Its pyramid rose over the city, battered but still imposing, ringed by smaller structures that sprawled outward. The harbor bustled with a handful of ships, but nowhere near the numbers that had once made Slaves Bay a hub of commerce. A gloom seemed to hang over the city, as if overshadowed by dread. Some foreign banners fluttered among the docks, but Gendry could not make out their sigils. They anchored carefully, sending word to the local harbor master that this was a diplomatic mission from Westeros, not an invasion. Even so, a contingent of heavily armed guards greeted them on the quay, suspicious eyes scanning the banners of the great houses. Prince Corin Martell, Lady Joy Lannister's envoy, a fierce middle-aged knight named Sir Simon, and Gendry himself disembarked with a small escort, leaving the bulk of their forces aboard the ships for now. They were met by a slim woman clad in the yellow robes of the Meereenese temple. Her face was lined with strain, but she bowed with polite courtesy, introducing herself as Nalira, an official sent by the city's ruling council. "We heard rumors that Westeros would be sending a fleet," Nalira said in the common tongue, each syllable laced with the accent of the East. "We did not expect so many. May I ask the purpose of your visit?" Gendry stepped forward, Storm's fury at his side. We come to offer aid if you want it. We've heard the Sons of the Flame are threatening these lands, enslaving people, and forging weapons of terrifying power. We wish to see if Meereen stands against them, and if so, how we might help." Nalira's eyes flicked to the sword at Gendry's hip. She said nothing, but a slight narrowing of her gaze suggested she recognized Valyrian steel, or at least something remarkable. "The city welcomes you," she said carefully. "But I must warn you, the council is divided on the question of foreign assistance. Some fear that letting an army from across the sea inside our walls could lead to new subjugation." Gendry nodded. "We have no intention of occupying Meereen or taking its lands. All we want is to stop the Sons of the Flame before they gain too much strength. Then you'll find allies in the council," Nolera allowed. "But also skeptics. If you will, follow me, and we can speak with them in the palace." "Men." Prince Corin exchanged a glance with Gendry, one that conveyed mutual caution. They followed Nalira through the narrow streets of Meereen, where once the bright murals of dragons and harpies might have adorned the walls. Now Gendry saw signs of neglect, cracks in the plaster, scorch marks from old conflicts, boarded-up windows. The people in the streets watched them pass with weary curiosity, children ducking behind doorways. A hush seemed to fall at the sight of the Westerosi banners. If Daenerys had once promised freedom here, it appeared the city had known more war than peace in the ensuing years. The palace, once the Great Pyramid, had been partially damaged by the battles in Daenerys' time, but was still the center of power. Inside, Gendry and his companions were led into a cavernous hall where the city's council awaited. Half a dozen figures dressed in varying styles of robes or armor sat behind a long table. Murmured introductions revealed a patchwork government. Some were ex-slaves who had risen to leadership, others were wealthy merchants who had profited from trade after Daenerys departed, and at least one was a priest of Arlor, whose eyes gleamed with fervor. They stared at the Westerosi visitors with guarded expressions. Nalira stood at the head of the table and gestured for Gendry's party to address the council. Gendry cleared his throat, feeling distinctly uncomfortable in this role of diplomat. "I am Lord Gendry Baratheon of Storm's End, representing the Iron Throne of Westeros. With me are Prince Corin Martell of Dorne, Sir Simon Lannister representing the West, and others. We come because we have heard that slavers calling themselves the Sons of the Flame are expanding around the Gulf of Grief, and perhaps further, terrorizing freedmen and capturing new slaves. Their greatest threat lies in the forging of black steel swords, similar to the Valyrian steel known in Westeros. These swords are extremely deadly." He paused, noticing how the mention of black steel made some council members glance at each other anxiously. One woman, her hair shot with gray, tapped her fingers on the table. "We have heard rumors," she said, voice low. "Refugees trickle into the city with tales of entire villages chained or burned, but we cannot confirm the specifics." A tall, stern-faced merchant crossed his arms. "What do you propose? If you simply wish for a trade agreement, we have little gold left to offer. If you want to start another war in our lands, we can't stop you, but I doubt the people will welcome it." Gendry replied, "We propose an alliance. We want to stop these slavers and their atrocities. That's all. Meereen knows better than most the cruelty of the old slavers' ways. We ask for safe harbor and any information you can share. In return, we'll do what we can to break the Sons of the Flame before they reach your gates." Nori, the priest of Arlor, a gaunt man with hollow cheeks, leaned forward. "You speak of black steel, fire-made flesh, the metal once shaped by the dragon lords of Valyria. Do you not wonder if the Lord of Light wills this resurgence as a test or a purge?" Davos, standing beside Gendry, frowned. "I have little interest in theological speculation, my good priest. Our concern is the immediate harm being done to innocent people." The priest's lips curved into a thin smile. "The innocent suffer, but sometimes from suffering rises the pure flame. Consider that the forging of Valyrian steel once involved sorcery and dragons. If these slavers have rediscovered such arts, perhaps the old ways are returning for a reason." A hush fell. Some counselors glared at the priest. Gendry bristled. He thought of the vile ritual he had seen in that fortress by the smoking sea. Nothing about it felt like divine revelation. It felt like torture and evil. "The forging of black steel you describe is not a blessing but an abomination," he said, carefully controlling his anger. They use blood magic. They bind captives and sacrifice them to fuel their forges. I saw it with my own eyes. Nalira's face drained of color. The gray-haired woman on the council exhaled sharply. A few looked down, unable to meet Gendry's gaze. At last, the stern merchant spoke, his voice subdued. If your words are true, then Meereen cannot stand by. We swore never to let slavers return with such power. But we lack the strength to fight them alone. Our city's defenses have not fully recovered from the wars. If you mean what you say, Westerosi, we will permit you to dock your ships under our banners. We will share what little intelligence we have on the Sons of the Flame. But our resources are limited. Gendry inclined his head. We appreciate your openness. We will do our best to protect Meereen from this threat, and hopefully stop it at the source. A tense silence followed. Then, with formal words, the council gave their provisional agreement. A section of the harbor would be designated for the Westerosi fleet. The foreigners were allowed to enter the city for supplies, though few truly welcomed them with open arms. Tensions simmered beneath the surface. Some worried that an army from Westeros might be as dangerous as the slavers themselves. That evening, Gendry returned to the quay to find that the rest of the Westerosi ships had docked, their various banners fluttering in the hot wind. Soldiers and knights stood guard while local workers helped unload cargo. Though they wore house colors, each contingent eyed the Meereenese with caution. The fact that these rival Westerosi houses had come so far together spoke to the gravity of the threat. Gendry stepped among them, exchanging quick words with the captains to ensure everyone knew where to camp outside the city walls. While Meereen had offered some lodging within, there were not enough safe or suitable quarters for so many, and Gendry preferred that the men remain close to their ships anyway, in case they needed to set sail quickly. He found Arya standing near a stack of crates, watching the bustle. She nodded in greeting. So the council agreed. Yes, Gendry said, though barely. They're afraid, but not entirely trusting. We have a free hand to pursue the Sons of the Flame outside their territory. They'll share what they know, which apparently isn't much. Arya's gaze roamed the dock. I want to see if any of the refugees in the city can tell us more. Sometimes councils hear only what they want to hear. Be careful, Gendry cautioned. This city may resent outsiders. There's likely a black market, suspicious eyes, spies from the Sons of the Flame. Neldwar. She gave a wolfish grin. I know how to handle myself. I'll take a few men if you insist, but I prefer to move quietly. He chuckled dryly. You always do. Take care though. These are dangerous times. They parted ways, with Arya disappearing into the twisting streets while Gendry checked on the camp. He oversaw the building of tents, the distribution of rations. By nightfall, torchlight shimmered over the assembled lines of Westerosi warriors, men from the north wearing thick leathers despite the heat, knights of the region gleaming half-plate, grim-faced ironborn scanning the horizon for potential raids, and bannermen of Storm's End who looked to Gendry for direction. It all felt surreal. This patchwork of West, East, and Dorne, united in a desert land halfway around the world from the Seven Kingdoms. But that was the shape of things now. The forging of new alliances, hammered by necessity. He tried to sleep in a command tent pitched near the shoreline, but the night was hot and filled with strange sounds. Somewhere in the city, a festival or riot rumbled. Drums pounded, voices chanted. The mingled scents of spices and sewage drifted on the breeze. Gendry lay awake, half dreaming of the day he'd stumbled into the hidden fortress of the Sons of the Flame. He kept remembering the captive's scream, the smell of burnt blood. His fists clenched, and at times he thought he heard the faint ring of a hammer on an anvil. Eventually, exhaustion pulled him under into a restless sleep. Come morning, Arya returned with news. She found Gendry hunched over a makeshift table with Davos Corran and a few other leaders, discussing the next steps. Sweat trickled down everyone's brow in the growing heat. Arya's expression was grim as she joined them. I spoke with some freedwomen who fled a settlement near Yunkai, she said. They'd been captured briefly by raiders who bore black steel swords, but they managed to escape when the raiders moved on to a larger target. They said the slavers were headed to Meereen's outskirts, testing the defenses of small towns. They're not a huge army yet, but their weapons and fear tactics make them dangerous. Corran frowned. If they strike the outlying villages, then they can choke Meereen's food supply, starve the city. Davos ran a hand through his thinning hair. Then we can't wait. We have to meet them on open ground if possible before they entrench. Gendry recalled the fortress near the Smoking Sea. They have a stronghold, but apparently they're sending out bands of raiders in all directions. We can't assault their main base unless we know we can hold out. Perhaps we start by crushing their raiding parties, showing the region that someone can stand against them. Nay, Arya nodded. It'll send a message, and maybe we'll capture some of these slavers to find out more about their forging process. How widespread it is. They can't possibly be forging hundreds of swords at once, not unless they have a massive supply of... She paused, hesitating, and Gendry saw the flicker of horror in her eyes as she realized what the supply might be. Slaves. Then we'd better move fast, Gendry said softly. He turned to Corin. Prince, how many riders can you muster quickly? The Dornish prince considered. I brought 100 light cavalry. The Lannisters have some horsemen too. If we combine forces, we might put a few hundred in the field within 2 days. Enough to handle raiders, maybe not enough for a pitched battle against a large force. That's a start, said Davos. We'll leave enough men to guard the ships in case the Sons have allies at sea. The rest of us can ride out to these border towns and see if we can force a confrontation. Arya offered, I'll scout ahead again, find the best route. We should avoid the main roads if they have watchers. The freedwomen I spoke to said the Sons have bribed some of the local warlords to let them pass. Gendry looked among them. It was risky, marching into an unfamiliar land, trusting they could win local support. But every hour they delayed was another hour the Sons could terrorize villages and capture more souls for their blood forging. Very well, he said. We ride in 2 days. Those 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Messages were exchanged with Meereen's council, who grudgingly offered a few local guides and promised a token force of spearmen. The Westerosi lords coordinated their men in an uneasy alliance. Occasionally, small disputes flared. A Lannister knight brawling with an Ironborn raider over rumored insults, or a Dornish captain arguing with a Stark bannerman over logistics. Each time, Gendry or Davos or Corin stepped in to quell tempers before swords were drawn. Gendry found himself thinking, at least they're not turning these new Valyrian swords on each other. Perhaps forging a blade for every great house was not in vain, if only because it made them cautious about conflict between themselves. On the second night, a messenger from the outskirts arrived at the camp, breathless and shaken. The Sons of the Flame had sacked a large village just 50 miles to the east. Houses burned, families taken. Survivors streamed into Meereen, battered and traumatized. The Sons were rumored to be heading farther inland towards some farmland that provided produce to the city. If they seized or destroyed that farmland, Meereen would be at their mercy. No more delays. At dawn, the makeshift alliance marched. Prince Corin led the Dornish cavalry with flamboyant style, wearing light armor that shimmered in gold filigree. The Lannisters fielded a contingent of knights under Sir Simon, a thickly built man with a short gray beard and a direct manner of commanding. House Greyjoy contributed a cluster of grim men who seemed better suited to sea raids but were determined to prove their might on land. The Northmen followed a tall, quiet officer named Huther Reed, who carried a short Valyrian steel spear Gendry had forged from leftover scrap. The rest came from the Reach, the Stormlands, and the Tullylands, all banded under the Westerosi banners. Meereen also sent a handful of local spearmen and archers. Altogether, their force numbered around 1,500 men, a respectable size but hardly a legion. Gendry rode at the front, his armor plain but sturdy, Storm's fury sheathed at his side. Arya scouted ahead with a small party, vanishing into the dust-blown horizon on swift horses. Davos took charge of supply wagons, ensuring they had enough water and food in this parched land. It was not an army to rival a full-blown invasion, but it was a force that would catch any wandering band of slavers by surprise, assuming they could find them before the suns melted away. After a grueling day's march under the punishing sun, they reached the burnt remains of the village the messenger had spoken of. Smoke curled from blackened timbers. The stench of charred flesh hung in the still air. Gendry dismounted, ignoring the sweat that soaked through his tunic, and walked among the rubble. They found bodies in the streets, cut down by savage blows. Some had limbs hacked off, while others showed clean slices that suggested a blade sharper than ordinary steel. Gendry's stomach twisted. He knelt by a fallen man whose face was frozen in horror. The slash across his chest was so smooth it looked almost like a scythe had passed through him. Traces of dark residue lined the wound, akin to scorched metal dust. Sir Simon Lannister grimaced. "They're here all right, or were." Davos came up behind them. "We'll see if any survivors are left." They found a handful hiding in the rubble. An old woman, delirious with grief, said the slavers came at dawn, led by a figure in red robes on horseback, flanked by heavily armed men. Most villagers either fled or were taken. Gendry asked her in a gentle tone, "Which way did they go?" She pointed east, muttering something about a windmill near a stream. Then she burst into sobs, mourning those who had been killed. Gendry thanked her and stood, forcing himself to breathe evenly. He felt the overwhelming urge to chase these slavers down immediately, to punish them for what they had done. But the land was vast, and they still needed an organized approach. When Arya returned from scouting an hour later, her horse lathered with sweat. She confirmed the route. She had spotted a column of riders moving beyond a ridge, maybe 100 strong, with wagons in tow, most likely carrying prisoners or loot. They're headed for farmland, probably planning to raid and then retreat south, she reported. They move fast, but not too fast for us if we push on. Some of them looked heavily armored. Gendry surveyed the men around him. They were already hot and tired from the march, but the fury in their eyes at the sight of the burned village suggested they were ready to fight. "We press on," he decided. "We'll ride ahead with the cavalry, see if we can catch them before they scatter." Davos stayed back to guard the slower infantry and wagons. The cavalry, Dornish Lannister and a few others, spurred their horses east, galloping across dusty plains. Gendry rode among them, feeling the wind tear at his face. The sun beat down mercilessly, but adrenaline surged through him. He clutched the reins, storm's fury bobbing at his side, the hilt cool against his hand. They crested a low ridge, and saw below them a wide stretch of brownish grass, dotted with scraggly trees. Near the far side, a line of riders was indeed making its way south. The red-robed leader was visible even at a distance. He seemed to sense the approach, because the column slowed, then turned to face the pursuers. Prince Corin shouted, "Knights of Dorne, with me!" and brandished Spear of Dawn, his curved Valyrian steel blade. A ripple of excitement spread through the cavalry. Gendry found himself riding alongside Corin as the Lannisters formed on the flank, horns blowing. Their charge kicked up clouds of dust. Gendry squinted through the haze, straining to pick out details of the enemy. At first, it looked like the slavers were outnumbered, only about 100 men. But as the dust settled, Gendry saw something that made his heart lurch. Many of the slavers held black-bladed swords or spears, their edges catching the sun with a dark, oily gleam. Some carried whips and wore cruel spiked armor that seemed to have bits of black steel embedded along the joints. They were fewer in number, yet Gendry suspected each of those swords could wreak havoc if used by skilled hands. "Forward!" Corin roared, and the mass of cavalry thundered down the slope. Gendry lowered his visor, drew Storm's fury, and felt the weight of it in his palm. This was the first time he would wield his own Valyrian steel sword against men who carried the same. The clash promised to be brutal. The enemy leader in red robes barked commands. Gendry could not make out the words, but he recognized the fervor in the man's gestures. The slavers formed into a wedge. Prisoners huddled behind them in a wagon, screaming as the horses reared. Whips cracked. Then, with a guttural war cry, the Sons of the Flame spurred their own mounts forward. The two forces collided in a whirlwind of dust, steel and flesh. Gendry's horse nearly crashed into a slaver's mount, and he slashed Storm's fury in a sideways arc. He felt the distinct lack of resistance as the blade sheared through the slaver's shoulder armor. Blood sprayed, and the man toppled with a strangled cry. Gendry grimaced at the sight but pressed on, turning his horse to avoid a black blade that hissed past his head. A Dornish rider next to him was not so lucky. He took a black steel sword to the side, and the blade bit through his cuirass like cloth. He slid off his mount with a dying groan. All around Gendry, the clang of steel rang out, though the collisions between Valyrian steel were unnerving. Rather than clashing and rebounding like normal metal, there was a sharper, almost musical ping, the edges scraping with shrieks that set teeth on edge. In the swirl of dust, Gendry saw Prince Corran locked in a duel against a slaver whose twin swords glowed black-red in the sun. Corran moved with fluid grace, parrying blow after blow, the two swords singing. Sparks flew in arcs of orange and crimson. Eventually, Corran found an opening and slashed diagonally. The slaver's chest plate parted. Corran's blade slid in, and with a gurgling gasp, the man toppled. Gendry pivoted and drove his sword down into another slaver's back, mindful not to lose momentum. The enemy's black steel sword clattered from his grip, blood soaking the ground. Another slaver came at Gendry from the side, a short spear in hand. Gendry barely blocked in time, Storm's fury meeting the spear's tip. The impact reverberated through his arms, but he gritted his teeth and shoved, unbalancing the foe. The slaver wrenched his weapon free and lunged again. Gendry twisted, hammered his pommel into the slaver's face, then drove Storm's fury forward. The black swirl along the blade flashed as it punctured leather and flesh, and the slaver's eyes rolled back. Horses screamed, men shouted. Dust stung Gendry's eyes. He heard the ring of more steel, the clash of Lannister armor. Sir Simon bellowed curses, driving his warhorse straight into a knot of slavers, swinging a longsword of ordinary steel with impressive might. The black steel weapons cut down a few of his men, but the Lannister contingent pressed the advantage of greater numbers, encircling them. Gradually, the Sons of the Flame realized they were outmatched. Their leader in red robes raised a staff that crackled with some eerie fire at the tip. Gendry felt the hair on his neck stand on end, as the air sizzled with strange power. Then a jet of flame burst forth, catching a horse's flank, making the animal shriek and collapse. At least 3 riders were spilled onto the dirt. The robed man prepared another conjuration, but Arya emerged from the dust, leaping onto the back of the wagon behind him. She drove her dagger into his side. He roared, flames licking around him. For a heartbeat, Gendry feared she would be engulfed by the fire. But Arya sprang away in time, leaving the robed leader clutching his wound. He toppled off his horse, his staff sputtering on the ground. The Sons' formation broke. Some tried to rally, others turned to flee. Corran signaled to chase them, and the Dornish cavalry spurred after the survivors. Gendry, panting, realized the battle was almost over. He wheeled his horse around, scanning for any immediate threat. Bodies littered the field, both slavers and Westerosi. The captured wagon was abandoned. Prisoners cowered within it, rattling chains. He swung down from his saddle, dust coating his face. Arya was nearby, wiping blood from her dagger. Their eyes met. She gave him a hard nod, and he exhaled in relief that she was unhurt. Then Gendry stepped toward the wagon, hacking at the chain that sealed the door. He noticed with a shock that the metal links were partially coated in that same black residue, as if they too had been treated with some vile forging technique. Inside were 6 captives, men, women, and 2 children, huddled in fear. They gazed at Gendry as though he might be another monster. He sheathed Storm's fury and raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're free," he said hoarsely. Then he tugged the chain, snapped it loose, and pulled the door open. With trembling caution, the prisoners crawled out. One woman fell to her knees, sobbing in an unfamiliar tongue. A man muttered thanks in broken Valyrian. A figure approached from behind, and Gendry tensed, but it was Prince Corran Martell, streaks of blood on his armor. He gazed at the freed prisoners, then at the corpses of the slavers strewn across the dusty ground. "We've done some good here," Corran said quietly. "But the cost?" He gestured to the fallen Westerosi. A handful of men moaned for help. Others lay silent. Gendry clenched his jaw. "We need to keep moving. This was just one raiding party." As he spoke, he noticed movement at the edge of the field. The robed leader Arya had stabbed was still alive, crawling away, leaving a trail of blood. Gendry strode over, wariness in every step. He could smell the tang of scorched fabric and coppery blood. The man's hood had fallen, revealing a bald head with tattoos forming a spiral around his eyes. He turned those eyes on Gendry, choking out words in a thick accent. "You wield the steel too," he rasped, gazing at Storm's fury. "But ours is blessed by the flame of blood." Gendry fought the urge to finish him then and there. Instead, he pressed the tip of his sword to the man's chest, applying just enough pressure to keep him pinned. "Where is your main fortress?" he demanded. How many swords do you have? How many forges? The robed man bared bloody teeth in a grin. You'll never stop us. The forges burn day and night. We have enough slaves to feed them, enough gold to buy more. The old ways will rise again. We will shape the world in the fire of Valyria. Oh. You're twisted monsters, Gendry said, anger tightening his voice. You take slaves, you torture them to forge black steel. Why? The man coughed, spitting blood. Because the steel is power incarnate. Because the world has gone soft. We see the truth. Only those with strength deserve to rule. He gave a rattling laugh. We know your name, Gendry Baratheon. Our spies told us of your forging. You think you share the secret of Valyrian steel with your precious lords. But we have the true secret. Blood. Our swords are alive, fed by souls. You'll never match that with your half-remembered technique. We'll take you too, make you forge for us, or feed the forges yourself. One day, you'll beg to. His words cut off as Gendry pressed Storm's fury forward, piercing the man's heart. The robed figure shuddered, eyes bulging, then fell limp. A swirl of dust settled on his motionless form. Gendry withdrew the blade, chest heaving in fury and revulsion. He stared down at the corpse, knowing that the threat was larger than a single raiding band. They had spy masters in Essos, perhaps in Bravos, and likely beyond. The Sons were well organized, well funded, and fueled by a fanatic creed that exalted cruelty. Arya approached, wiping sweat from her brow. We'll find their fortress eventually, she said quietly. We have to. Gendry nodded, though a knot in his chest told him the fight would only get worse. We'll free as many captives as we can along the way. If we can keep them from gathering more, maybe we can cut off their forging supply. Prince Corran gave a deep sigh. A day's ride from here is farmland, then some scattered villages. We can secure them, but the main base is another matter. The smoking sea is weeks away, across harsh terrain and wastelands. They'll see us coming if we march with an army. Ser Simon, approaching with a limp and a gash in his arm, offered his grim perspective. We might have to divide our forces. A smaller group can move faster, attempt to reach the fortress by stealth. The main host can keep chasing the raiding parties to protect the local populace. But we need to be certain we can handle ourselves if we do that. Nay. Gendry faced the men, Arya, and a few others who'd gathered. The prisoners cowered nearby, uncertain of their fate. Let's do what we can here first, he said, pointing to the freed captives. We'll see they're looked after, bury the dead, treat our wounded. Then we plan our next move carefully. I don't fancy walking into that fortress unprepared. The Sons of the Flame have sorcery and an unknown number of black steel swords. We need more than just force. We need strategy, maybe subterfuge. Arya arched an eyebrow. Subterfuge is something I understand. Though the day was searing, Gendry felt a chill. He glanced at the bodies of the slavers, noting the unnatural swirl of darkness in their blades, as though it were congealed evil. The forging of that black steel was anathema to all he believed. He had hammered new Valyrian steel in Westeros hoping to unify the realm. Now he saw the darkest reflection of that dream, men twisting the same knowledge into an empire of bondage. He swallowed his grief and fury, turning to help gather the wounded. There was no time to dwell on regrets or doubts. Duty pulled him forward. They spent the rest of the day tending to the aftermath. The free captives were given water, food, and what comfort the Westerosi could provide. A few found distant relatives among the ranks of Meereenese volunteers. The rest simply stared numbly, traumatized by the violence they had witnessed. Gendry ordered his men to lay the dead in rows, identifying them where possible. The heat made the chore even more grim, the smell unbearable. Crows circled overhead, impatient. By dusk, they had regrouped. The cavalry rejoined the slower main host, which arrived with Davos looking relieved that the battle was over, for now. Davos surveyed the carnage with a grim set to his mouth. So it's true, they carry black steel in large numbers. The question is, how many more of these raiding parties roam the countryside? Gendry wiped sweat from his brow. We'll have to scout in all directions. We can't let them strike another village unchecked. Meanwhile, Arya might slip ahead with a small team, see if she can confirm a path to the fortress. We should also send word back to Meereen, to let them know we took care of this group. Prince Corin agreed, though he looked tired. Yes, and the men need rest. We'll make a temporary camp here, bury our dead, and move on at first light. That night, the combined forces huddled in the remnants of the burned village. Many of the houses were destroyed, so they slept under the open sky or in tents. Gendry found no appetite, though Davos insisted he take a bowl of stew. He forced it down, his mind churning with images of the day's bloodshed. When he tried to rest, he kept thinking about the robed slavers' words. They had spies in Bravos. They might know how to find him, to abduct him, force him to forge. The notion turned his stomach. He had to ensure that never happened, to him or to anyone else. No more forging black steel with blood. Close to midnight, he rose and wandered outside the ring of tents. The night air was marginally cooler, but still heavy with the odor of ash and death. He looked up at the sky, where strange constellations glittered above Essos. After a while, he heard a quiet step behind him. Arya. She came up without speaking, her posture tense yet calm in that way he remembered from their days in the Brotherhood without banners. The two of them stood silently for a time, letting the hush of night settle between them. Finally, Arya said, I volunteered to go ahead with a scouting party. Just a small group. Maybe a half-dozen. We'll ride light and fast, see if we can locate the fortress or at least the route. We'll have to rely on local guides if we can find any who'll help. But I'd rather not rely on someone who might betray us. Nettie. Gendry glanced at her, lit by the faint glow of the moon. There was steel in her gaze, like the blade of needle, honed to a deadly point. You're sure you want to do this alone? She shrugged. I won't be alone, just not marching with 1,000 men. We're more likely to slip by unnoticed. Someone needs to find a path. I'm good at staying unseen. I learned from the best. A fleeting shadow of a smile crossed her face, though it didn't reach her eyes. Gendry sighed. I know you are. I just can't help worrying. Arya tilted her head. I've survived worse. Don't forget, I spent time among the faceless men. Besides, if these slavers think they can snatch me easily, they're mistaken. He could not argue. In truth, Arya was probably their best chance of infiltration or gathering intelligence. If a large host approached the fortress, the Sons of the Flame would surely fortify themselves or flee into the wilderness to continue their raids. But a small group might slip in, see what they were dealing with, and return to plan a coordinated assault. All right, he said. But keep us informed if you can. We'll keep pushing eastward to intercept any more raiders. Arya nodded. I'll leave in the morning. If I find anything worth knowing, I'll send a raven back to Meereen, or find you directly. She hesitated, then put a hand on his shoulder. Take care of yourself. There's no point forging a better world if you're not in it. She squeezed briefly, then withdrew into the darkness. Gendry stared after her, an uneasy swirl of emotions in his chest. The bond they shared had been shaped by hardship and parted by circumstance so many times. She was a wanderer, always had been. He reminded himself that she thrived in these challenges, that she was at her best moving like a shadow through hostile lands. Even so, he prayed for her safe return. Dawn came, the sky streaked with vivid pink and orange, as though the world itself was stained with fire. Arya gathered 5 men, 2 scouts from the north, 1 Dornish outrider, and 2 others who had served in Essos before, and rode east, soon vanishing into the distance. Gendry remained behind with Prince Corin, Davos, and the rest. They fanned out across the farmland, discovering more horrors. Houses burned, people abducted. Some survivors told of the slavers splitting into smaller groups, one heading north, one southeast. Gendry cursed the necessity of chasing them in multiple directions, but they had no choice if they wanted to shield these lands from further raids. Days slipped by in a blur of dust and sweat. The Westerosi Alliance engaged 2 more raiding parties, each time emerging victorious but at a cost. Every battle revealed more black steel in the hands of the Sons. The slavers fought with ruthless ferocity, often chanting about the flame of Valyria as they charged. They used terror to scatter peasants, then snatch those who lagged behind, presumably to feed their forges. The scale of their operation was staggering, though Gendry suspected the largest stockpile of black steel was still hoarded in their fortress near the smoking sea. Between skirmishes, Gendry found himself riding across empty expanses with Davos, scanning the horizon for columns of smoke. News filtered back from Meereen that other slaver factions had begun stirring, emboldened by the Sons of the Flame's success. Some smaller towns were forging alliances with them out of fear or for a share of the profits. The trade routes from Westeros to Essos grew ever more perilous. Rumor had it that the Iron Bank was covertly lending coin to unknown parties, possibly both sides. With each success in battle, the Alliance freed a few captives, but it felt like bailing out the sea with a bucket. The large stream of enslaved folk presumably ended up in that hidden fortress. Gendry refused to let despair take hold. He reminded himself that Arya was out there, seeking a way to strike at the heart of the problem. Then, one afternoon, as they rested in the shade of a rocky outcrop, a sentry spotted a lone rider in the distance. The figure came closer, galloping with frantic urgency. Gendry recognized the short hair, the compact frame. Arya T. She reined her horse to a halt, sweat darkening her mount's flanks. Her face was etched with exhaustion and alarm. "I found it," she said, barely waiting to catch her breath. "The fortress. The outskirts, at least. It's perched near a cliff overlooking a dead lake. They have walls of black stone, watchtowers, hundreds of men. I couldn't get inside. There's too much security. But I saw caravans of chained slaves being herded in. They've built multiple forged towers. At night, you can see the glow of their fires lighting the sky." "No." A hush fell over the gathered men. Davos exhaled. "Hells, that's worse than I imagined." Arya continued. "They have patrols scouring the region, and I just barely avoided them. They have some monstrous beasts, too. Looks like crossbreeds of war dogs or something. I heard rumors of even stranger creations within. They're experimenting, Gendry. Using the blood magic not just on steel but on animals. Maybe on men." Gendry felt a fresh wave of nausea. This was beyond forging weapons. They were dabbling in twisted arts that might rival the darkest horrors of old Valyria. "Did you see how many swords they've stockpiled?" he asked. She shook her head. "I couldn't tell, but from the carts and the forges, they're mass-producing. Possibly enough to equip thousands. Maybe more. They have shipments of raw materials coming in from the south and from the sea. There's a cove nearby, hidden among rocks, where smaller ships can dock. I saw crates labeled with Braavosi script. The Sons have a trade network." Corran spat on the ground. "Then we must strike soon. If they keep producing, they'll outmatch every army in Essos, and maybe even Westeros." Arya looked from Corran to Gendry, her eyes hard. "Easier said than done. We can't just march in with 1,000 men. Their fortress is a fortress in truth. Thick walls, watchtowers. We'd lose half our forces in a frontal assault, and that's if we're lucky. Meanwhile, they'd keep forging. They have an entire labyrinth of tunnels beneath the structure, connected to some old Valyrian mines, or so the locals said. Trying to siege them might take months or years." "Nay." Davos rubbed the stubble on his chin. "We don't have months or years. They'll keep sending out raiders, keep capturing souls. And if they truly have some kind of sorceress breeding program for monstrous animals, Seven save us." Gendry raked a hand through his hair. "We need a plan that doesn't rely on brute force. Something to disrupt their forging. If we can destroy their forges, free the slaves, we might cripple their production. Even if some swords remain out there, at least they can't keep making more." "Nay, Anole." Arya nodded. "Exactly. A small team might slip inside, sabotage the forges from within, maybe start a slave revolt at the same time. It would be dangerous, but a massed army would only hammer at the walls. If we strike from the inside, we might cause enough chaos to open the gates. Let the main host pour in." Prince Corran considered this. "It's a bold plan. Sabotage the forges, free the slaves, open the gates. But who would lead such a mission?" "One child." Arya looked at Gendry, and he understood at once. He was the one who knew the forging process intimately, who understood how to destroy or disable a Valyrian steel forge. It made sense that he would go, even if it frightened him. He swallowed hard. "All right, if we do this, we need the cover of darkness. We also need to ensure that while we're inside, the main host is ready to strike. If we succeed in opening the gates and sowing confusion, you have to charge in at that moment." Davos let out a slow breath. "We'll be risking everything on that gamble." "We don't have a better option," Arya said. "Every day we wait, their power grows." The others murmured agreement, albeit with grim faces. Corin wiped sweat from his brow. "Very well. We'll gather as many men as we can spare, move the army into position near the fortress, quietly, so they don't see us coming. Meanwhile, you and a small infiltration team will slip inside. We'll coordinate signals. Once you disable or destroy the forges, we'll attack." Gendry's stomach churned. Even as a blacksmith lord, he had never led a covert mission like this. "We'll need more details," he told Arya. "Floor plans, guard routines, anything, or we rely on improvisation." She shrugged. "I gleaned what I could, but the place is huge. Improvisation might be all we have. We'd better recruit a group of skilled fighters who can move silently, pick locks, handle themselves if cornered, and we'll need some way to smuggle in. We can't just waltz through the gates in broad daylight." Davos scratched at his cheek, glancing at the prisoners they had freed in past days. "We have people who escaped from that fortress. Maybe they know a secret entrance or a section of the wall that's less guarded." It was as good a starting point as any. Gendry turned to the men around him, steel in his voice. "All right, let's prepare. We'll ride south, circle around, approach the fortress from the less traveled side. We'll gather intelligence on the way, see if we can find a hidden route. Once we're close, we'll camp out of sight and plan the infiltration. This is our chance to cut the head off the snake." So it was decided. Arya led them to a vantage point a few days right away, one with rocky hills that could shield a hidden camp. The route there was punishing. Scorching heat, dusty winds, sparse waterholes. Along the way, they found more scattered survivors of slaver raids. Some joined the trek, eager for vengeance. Others were too broken in body or spirit, and Gendry arranged for them to be escorted back to safer territory. With every mile, the Alliance's supply lines stretched thinner. But they pressed on, fueled by the knowledge that nothing short of direct action could stop the forging of an endless black steel army. The sun's fortress loomed on a craggy rise near a dried lakebed. Volcanic vents dotted the land, spewing foul-smelling fumes. At night, a faint glow indeed lit the sky, as Arya had said, a sullen red glare suggesting forges burning ceaselessly. The place was ringed by a high wall of obsidian-like stone, with gatehouses to the north and west. Watchtowers bristled with archers, and patrols circled the perimeter. In the distance, Gendry thought he could make out some twisted shapes prowling the grounds, possibly those monstrous hounds Arya had mentioned. They made camp behind a ridge 2 miles away, concealed by a labyrinth of rock formations. Scouts were sent to observe the fortress day and night, noting guard changes. Meanwhile, Gendry and Arya consulted with a scarred man who had once been a slave inside. He was missing half an ear and had lash marks crisscrossing his back, but he remembered a section of tunnels that led to an old cistern beneath the fortress. "They used us to clear rubble," he said in a broken accent. "Some tunnels collapsed, but maybe still open. If you find the cistern entrance by the lakebed, you can crawl inside. It is tight and dangerous, but leads into the lower dungeon." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. Gendry stared at the fortress from a high vantage point. Smoke curled from vents, the red glow pulsing like a heartbeat. "All right," he finally said. "We'll try it. We'll bring a small team, myself, Arya, a handful of others. We slip in through the tunnels, sabotage the forges, free as many slaves as we can. Meanwhile, Corin and Davos will be ready with the main force. If we succeed, we'll try to open the gates or cause enough chaos that the Sons won't be able to close ranks. Then the rest of you charge." They chose the infiltration team carefully. Arya, of course, for her stealth and skill. 2 ex-slaves who knew the layout. A pair of Ironborn who specialized in infiltration, though Gendry mistrusted their motives, they swore to follow orders. And a subtle rogue from the Vale named Miles Stone who'd proven adept at picking locks. 7 in total, including Gendry. They armed themselves lightly, wearing dark clothing instead of heavy armor. Gendry still carried Storm's Fury, wrapping its hilt in cloth to hide the glint of metal. The infiltration would begin at night when the fortress guards might be less vigilant. Night fell at last. The infiltration group slipped away from the camp under the faint glimmer of stars, traveling on foot to avoid hoarse noise. They skirted the dried lakebed, mindful of the stench of sulfur from cracks in the ground. Every step felt precarious. One misstep could alert a patrol or trigger a collapse into a hidden sinkhole. Arya led the way, her steps soft and deliberate. The ex-slaves, one named Corvus and the other Rena, followed, pointing out landmarks in hushed tones. Eventually, they reached the mouth of the old cistern tunnel, a jagged hole in a rocky embankment. A trickle of foul water seeped from within, forming a stagnant pool. Gendry crouched, peering inside. It was pitch black, and the air that wafted out smelled of rot and decay. Perhaps that was a good sign. The Sons might not expect intruders to come from such a vile place. One by one, they crawled in. The tunnel was barely large enough for a grown man to pass with hunched shoulders. The water at the bottom was ankle-deep, slimy. Rocks jutted from the ceiling, scraping their backs. Gendry felt his heart hammer as he inched forward, Storm's fury at his side. The darkness pressed in on every side. Someone behind him muttered a curse in the gloom. They crept onward for what felt like an eternity, guided only by Corvus's memory and the occasional faint draft that suggested openings ahead. A rat scurried past, brushing Gendry's boot. The tunnel forked twice, but Rena insisted the left passage led to a dead end. Finally, they found an iron grate overhead. Rusted bars partially blocked the way. Miles Stone whispered, "I can pry it loose, or pick the lock if it's bolted." He set to work quietly with a small set of tools. After 10 minutes, the grate shifted with a squeal that sounded thunderous in the enclosed space. They froze, listening for any sign of alarm. Silence. Miles eased it aside, revealing a cramped ladder leading upward. Gendry motioned for them to wait while he climbed to peer through the opening. He emerged in a dank subterranean chamber, half-flooded. Broken barrels and crates lined the walls, as if this area had once served as a storage cellar but had been abandoned. A single corridor led away, faintly lit by torches at the far end. The smell of smoke and metal carried on the stale air. He gestured for the others to follow. In minutes, the infiltration team stood in the murky room, water lapping around their ankles. Gendry nodded at Arya. Then together they moved toward the corridor, crouching low. The flicker of torchlight revealed a rough-hewn tunnel that sloped upward. Distant clangs echoed, a hammer on metal, or some monstrous contraption. Gendry's stomach twisted at the familiarity of that sound. It was the ring of forging, but with a discordant edge. They proceeded, each footstep placed carefully. At a bend, Gendry peered around the corner and glimpsed a guard slouched against the wall, half dozing. He wore battered armor that gleamed with patches of black steel. A black blade leaned against the wall beside him. Gendry motioned to Arya. In a smooth blur, she slipped forward, clamped a hand over the guard's mouth, and drew a thin knife across his throat. He jerked once, blood spilling down his chest. Arya eased him to the ground. The blade made almost no sound. Corvus and Rena stared, faces pale. They had seen death before, but the hush of this killing reminded them how deadly their mission was. Gendry looked at them apologetically. "No turning back now," he whispered. They nodded, swallowing fear. They dragged the body aside, then moved on. The tunnel ended at a stone archway leading into a vast open chamber. The sudden heat and noise struck them like a wave. Roaring fires, chains rattling, men shouting. Gendry crouched behind a low wall, peering into the gloom. It was one of the fortress's forge halls. Dozens of slaves toiled at anvils, shackled at the ankles. Hooded overseers marched among them, cracking whips. Gendry's eye was drawn to a central furnace that glowed a near white, fed by bellows, and some eerie greenish flame. The air shimmered with heat. At a side station he saw a line of raw ore lumps, and next to them, lumps of something else. He realized with a jolt that they were lumps of dragonglass, hauled from somewhere. He recognized the black sheen. But more disturbing were vats of dark fluid, congealed with a coppery stench. Blood. No doubt used to quench the metal. Arya's lips curled in revulsion. The entire operation was an assembly line of horror. Slaves hammered the heated metal under the watchful eyes of the Sons. Occasionally an overseer would dip a ladle into a vat of blood, pouring it onto the metal as it was shaped. The hiss and steam made Gendry shudder. One of the ex-slaves, Corvus, clutched his face in silent anguish, recalling how he'd been forced to do such work. Gendry forced himself to remain focused. There were perhaps 20 or 30 guards in this chamber, some carrying black steel weapons. If the infiltration team engaged them openly, they'd be outnumbered quickly. But if they could sabotage the furnace, set off an explosion or collapse part of the chamber, that might do the job. Miles Stone whispered, "We could place wildfire if we had it, but we don't. Maybe we can block the chimneys?" Arya shook her head. "Look at the slaves. They'd be trapped in any explosion. We want to free them, not kill them." Gendry scanned the chamber. He saw multiple supporting pillars, each looking precarious. He noted a large overhead crane used to move heavy crucibles of molten metal. If that crane fell, it could smash the furnace or break open the blood vats. Chaos would follow. Perhaps in that confusion the slaves could escape. Gendry pointed. "We sever the ropes or chains holding that crane. It might bring down the entire rigging. Then we open the slave pens. We have to cause enough of a distraction that they can flee." Arya nodded. "We'll have to be quick. The moment the first alarm sounds, the rest of the fortress will mobilize." Rena swallowed. "We know where the main slave pen is, down a corridor on the left. The gate is locked, but I can lead you there. Free the others. Corvus can help sabotage the crane." Gendry turned to the Ironborn pair. "Keep watch at the entrance. If guards come, delay them or kill them quietly. Once the crane falls, we'll all converge on the pen, rally the slaves, and head for the gates if we can. That's when Corrin and Davos should be attacking outside, if the timing is right." Nah. They formed a circle, exchanging grim nods. The plan was insane, but it was all they had. The infiltration team split. Gendry and Arya crept along a raised walkway above the forge floor, aiming to get closer to the crane mechanism. Corvus trailed them, scanning for the right place to sabotage. Miles, Rena, and the Ironborn circled to the left, seeking the pen. He assaulted Gendry as he moved along a sweltering catwalk. Sweat dripped down his cheeks, and the roar of the furnace made it hard to hear. Below, slaves hammered away. Overseers barked commands in a mix of Valyrian and something else. Gendry took slow, steady breaths, ignoring his own fury at the sight. He had to focus on the mission. They reached a cluster of gears and pulleys that supported the crane's arm. Chains creaked under the weight of a massive crucible filled with molten metal, glowing orange. If that crucible fell onto the furnace or the blood vats, it would wreak havoc. Gendry examined the chain links, biting his lip. Each link was thick, reinforced. Even Valyrian steel might need repeated blows to cut through. But there was a lever that locked the chain in place. If it was disengaged while the crucible was raised, the chain might spool out uncontrollably. The entire crucible would crash down. Corvus crouched by the mechanism. "I can unlock it," he whispered, "but we need to do it at just the right moment. If we release it now, the overseers might see it coming and move the slaves out of the way or raise an alarm." Arya peered down below. Miles and the others should be freeing the slaves any moment. That'll draw attention. Once the guards run to deal with that, we release the crane. They waited, hearts pounding, as the minutes stretched. Gendry noticed the overhead catwalk was poorly lit, flickering torches far below. They had some cover in the gloom. He prayed that Miles, Rena, and the others hadn't been discovered. He felt a bead of sweat run down his temple. Then across the chamber, a muffled shout. Another distant clashing of steel. The alarm was raised. Gendry saw a group of guards rushing toward the far corridor. Arya nodded at Corvus. "Now." Corvus yanked the lever with a grunt. A heavy pin slid free, and the chains suddenly rattled with terrifying speed. Gendry scrambled back as the entire crane arm jerked. Below, a molten crucible swung wildly. Slaves scattered in alarm, but the overseers couldn't react in time. With a shriek of metal, the chain snapped from the gear, and the huge crucible plummeted, striking the edge of the furnace. A deafening crash. Molten metal spilled onto the furnace platform, igniting vats of blood and fuel. Fire exploded upward, a geyser of flame and sparks. Overseers screamed as the heat wave swept through them. The entire chamber shook as supporting beams cracked, sending rubble crashing down. Chaos erupted. Guards shouted, trying to extinguish the flames or rescue equipment. Slaves, seeing their chance, began to run in all directions. Several black steel swords were abandoned on the ground in the scramble. Alarm bells rang from deeper in the fortress. "Go!" Gendry roared over the din. He and Arya scrambled down a ladder onto the floor, dodging flaming debris. An overseer lunged at them, black sword in hand, but Arya parried with a lightning-quick strike of her dagger, and Gendry slammed Storm's fury into the man's side. The black steel sword clanged to the ground as the overseer collapsed. Another guard came from behind, but Corvus tackled him, wrestling him away. Amid the flames, slaves scattered like startled birds. Some were still chained at the ankles, hobbling toward the corridor where Miles and Rena had gone. Gendry carved through a lock with Storm's fury, freeing a cluster of them. "Follow us," he shouted, pointing toward the exit. "We have allies outside, go!" A blast of heat forced him to stumble back. The furnace was fully ablaze, licking the ceiling in a cascade of sparks. If the rest of the fortress was made of stone, it might not burn easily, but the interior wooden beams threatened to collapse. Arya coughed, eyes watering. "We have to find Miles and Rena, help the rest of the slaves." They plunged into the corridor, stepping over bodies, swirling smoke. A frantic overseer tried to bar their way. Gendry ducked under a scything black blade and slashed upward, severing the man's arm. The man shrieked and dropped, blood spraying the walls. In the corridor beyond, they found a heavy gate hammered open from inside. Miles Stone stood over the corpse of a guard, lockpicks in one hand, a short sword in the other. Freed slaves poured through the gate, clutching each other and weeping. Among them was Rena, coaxing them forward. "This way," Arya shouted. "Head for the courtyard if you can. We'll open the gates." Slaves surged forward, but more guards arrived from side passages. Gendry and Arya lunged to intercept. Storm's fury clashed against black steel. The jarring impact sent a spike of pain through Gendry's wrists. He gritted his teeth, pushing the guard back. The swirl of black on black steel was mesmerizing in the torchlight, but Gendry forced himself to move, pivoting aside and slicing horizontally. The guard's sword arm went limp, severed. Another slaver attacked from behind, but Corvus, bleeding from a cut across his brow, tackled him, giving Arya the chance to drive a dagger into his throat. The infiltration team retreated with the horde of slaves, each step a desperate battle. The corridor opened onto a wide courtyard that was a chaotic battleground. Flaming debris from the forge hall had apparently collapsed part of the fortress wall, or so it seemed. A chunk of masonry had fallen, opening a gap. Guards milled in confusion, trying to form a line. Freed slaves scrambled around them, and in the distance, Gendry heard horns blaring. The attack from Corrin and Davos must have begun. Shouts in Westerosi echoed from outside. They were here. Gendry saw a battered gatehouse near the courtyard's far side. If they could reach it, open the gates, the allied host could pour in. He turned to Arya and the others, panting. "To the gatehouse. We can let in our army." They forged ahead, rallying a stream of terrified slaves behind them. Sporadic fighting raged as pockets of Sons of the Flame tried to hold positions. Gendry caught a glimpse of monstrous dogs prowling the far side of the courtyard, huge beasts with patches of black steel embedded in their flesh. They snarled, lunging at freed slaves. Prince Corrin's cavalry had arrived near the walls, and Gendry watched in awe as a Dornish knight speared one beast through the throat with a lance, only to be dragged from his saddle by another. Screams and growls filled the air. Arya led the way up the stairs to the gatehouse, the infiltration team close behind. The stone steps were narrow, forcing them to fight one or two guards at a time. Gendry's muscles burned, but Storm's fury felt weightless, slicing through the sun's defenses. The Ironborn pair joined them, hacking with savage glee. Miles Stone kicked open a door at the top of the stair. Inside, a handful of men tried desperately to operate the portcullis mechanism. Gendry and Arya rushed them, steel flashing. In a flurry of blows, the men fell. Blood splattered the gears and levers. "Lower the drawbridge, raise the gate, whatever system they have," Gendry said. Miles examined the complex mechanism of chains and pulleys. Arya poked her head out a narrow window slot, seeing the fortress gate below. "It's still shut, but we can open it from here." "Nay." They heard distant war cries as the Westerosi and Dornish hammered the fortress walls. If Gendry opened the gate, their allies could flood in, overwhelming the defenders. He turned one of the giant wheels with a grunt, its rusted teeth creaking. Miles worked another lever. Slowly, they heard the groan of the portcullis lifting. Arya peered out and shouted, "Yes, it's rising!" Below, in the courtyard, the Sons of the Flame realized too late what was happening. Freed slaves poured through the space, making for the gate. Then, with a thunderous crash, Corran's cavalry and Sir Simon's knights charged into the fortress. Lannister banners, Dornish banners, the Kraken of the Iron Isles. They all streamed through the open gate, clashing with the panicked slavers. The courtyard erupted into a chaotic melee. Gendry gripped the wheel, heaving it a bit more to ensure the gate was fully raised, then jammed it in place with a broken spear. They'd done it. Arya stepped back from the window, face streaked with soot and sweat. She and Gendry exchanged a fierce smile, fleeting amidst the chaos, and then they hurried downstairs to join the fray. The fortress interior had become a war zone. Freed slaves armed themselves with whatever they could find, some even grabbing black steel swords from fallen slavers. The Sons fought viciously, chanting about fire and blood, but the suddenness of the sabotage and the pincer attack had shattered their cohesion. Gendry, Arya, and the infiltration team emerged into the courtyard, where Prince Corran galloped past on a horse, spear of dawn raised. He shouted, "Drive them back! Spare the slaves!" Flaming debris from the collapsed forge hall still rained sparks. The monstrous dogs snarled, but archers picked them off. The Sons' illusions of invincibility fractured. In the swirling carnage, Gendry spotted a figure in elaborate black steel armor, wielding a massive two-handed sword that glowed with runic etchings. The man roared commands in a guttural language, trying to rally the Sons. Gendry knew that had to be one of their high leaders. Without thinking, he charged forward, Storm's fury in hand. The leader swung his giant sword, sending two Westerosi knights crashing aside like rag dolls. Gendry dove to avoid a decapitating strike, rolling across the blood-slick ground. He came up with Storm's fury raised. The black blade hissed, meeting Gendry's blade in a clash that sent vibrations up both arms. The man was unnaturally strong. Could it be sorcery? Gendry struggled to hold his ground. Sparks flew as they locked swords. Then Arya sprang from behind, slashing at the man's knee. Her dagger didn't pierce his thick armor, but it distracted him. He spun with a snarl, smashing Arya aside with an armored fist. She staggered, but it gave Gendry an opening. He drove forward, hooking Storm's fury under the man's guard. The black swirl of Valyrian steel bit into a seam between plates, puncturing flesh. The man roared in pain, tried to swing again, but Arya recovered and thrust her dagger into his visor. He stiffened, gurgling, and fell in a clatter of steel. Across the courtyard, the Sons were routed. Many threw down their weapons, terrified slaves turning on them with improvised clubs. The Westerosi alliance pressed in, capturing or killing the last pockets of resistance. As dawn light began to streak the smoky sky, the fortress was theirs. The grand forging operation of the Sons of the Flame had collapsed in flames. Gendry stood amid the wreckage, chest heaving, Storm's fury dripping with blood. He saw freed slaves hugging each other, weeping in relief. Soldiers of Dorne and the West cheered, though many lay wounded or dead. The entire fortress stank of char and death, but a measure of liberation had been won here. They had stopped the forging, for now. He prayed the cost had not been too high. Davos found him limping slightly, a bruise forming on his cheek. "We did it," he said. "The forges are destroyed, or close enough. We'll have to search the fortress thoroughly, make sure there are no hidden forges, no hidden caches, but the main operation is gone." Gendry nodded, too exhausted for words. The devastation around him spoke volumes. Battered walls, half-collapsed forge chambers, black steel swords littering the ground like sinister relics. Slaves were led outside, blinking in the dawn. Some collapsed, malnourished and traumatized. Others stepped cautiously, wary of yet another betrayal. Prince Corran rode up, dismounting near Gendry. "Well fought," he said, removing his helm. "The Sun's stronghold is broken. Their forging secrets die with them." Arya approached, wiping sweat from her brow, the corners of her mouth tight. She glanced at the swirl of black steel swords on the ground, many still clutched by dead slavers. We'll have to gather these up, destroy them if we can. Or maybe lock them away. Now, brave. Gendry gazed at the swirling patterns on the lethal blades, remembering how each might have been forged with the blood of innocence. Yes, he said hoarsely. Melt them down if that's even possible. They're an abomination. He drew in a ragged breath. We should do what we can to help the freed slaves, tend the wounded, then we'll gather what's left of the sons, see if any surrendered. They might have information on other cells. It was a monumental task, but they set to work. Hours blurred into a day, then 2, then 3. The fortress was searched from top to bottom. Deep in the tunnels they found rooms of horror. Cells where captives had been bled out, altars to dark gods, stores of dragonglass, raw iron, and grim diaries detailing forging experiments. They destroyed or sealed everything. The freed slaves were given food, water, and offered safe passage to Marine or beyond. Many were ill or wounded, requiring triage. Some volunteered to help rebuild or bury the dead. At last, with the fortress pacified, Gendry stood on a battlement overlooking the ravaged courtyard. Ash drifted on the breeze. He closed his eyes, feeling weariness seep into his bones. Arya came up beside him, silent for a while. It's over, she murmured. For now. He nodded. We've broken their main forge. This was the heart of their power. Without it, they can't mass-produce black steel, but there might be smaller forges elsewhere. She studied his face, the lines of worry etched there. You did what needed to be done. All those people you freed. Their lives are changed forever. He swallowed. I just hope the knowledge of forging doesn't keep spreading. This twisted version of it, I mean. My method in Westeros doesn't involve blood magic, but I'm sure someone else will try to copy the sons. Arya laid a hand on his arm. Then we'll stop them, whenever they appear. The realm stands together now, because of your gift. That unity can face down any threat. He took solace in her words, remembering how each great house possessed one of his blades, forging a balance of power. If the knowledge had to exist, at least it was tempered by the willingness to unite when evil threatened. Maybe that was the best they could hope for. A world where swords existed but did not dominate, where men and women stood against the darkness rather than bowing to it. They descended from the battlement, passing lines of newly freed folk who gazed at Gendry with a mixture of awe and gratitude. He felt a lump in his throat. He wasn't a king or a chosen one, just a blacksmith who had learned how to shape Valyrian steel. But in a way, he had shaped more than swords. He had shaped a possibility of cooperation, the chance for men and women to resist evil instead of cowering before it. Davos joined them holding a parchment. We found a map in one of the slavers' chambers. It points to contacts in Volantis mere lies, other places that might have been supplying them. We'll have to decide what to do about that. We can't let them rebuild under another name. Gendry looked at Arya, who arched an eyebrow. More adventures ahead? She gave a small grin. Seems so. I never did like staying in one place. He turned to Davos. We'll bring this information back to King's Landing and the great houses. Maybe the realm can organize a coalition to root out slavers for good. Davos sighed. A tall order, but we've done tall orders before. At least this fortress won't be tormenting anyone else. Prince Corran approached, a triumphant light in his eyes. My men have found hidden storerooms of gold, likely the sun's war chest. We can distribute it among the freed slaves or use it to rebuild. I suspect your King Bran would prefer we put it to good use. Yes, Gendry said. These people need resources to start anew. They made plans in the days that followed. A small garrison would remain in the fortress to ensure no one reclaimed it for nefarious ends, while the majority of the Westerosi forces and freed slaves returned toward Meereen to receive supplies and further assistance. Gendry personally oversaw the dismantling of the last functional bits of forge equipment, smashing them or hauling them away. His hammer rang on the anvil, but this time not to shape steel, only to destroy the instruments of torture. It felt like a necessary cleansing of his own conscience. At length, the day came to depart. The fortress, once a place of dread, now stood largely empty and silent. Smoke no longer rose from the chimneys, and the echo of hammers on steel had died away. The sons of the flame were scattered or slain. Some had fled into the wilds, but, without their main base, they were unlikely to remain a formidable force. Gendry mounted his horse, Storm's fury sheathed, and gazed up at the blackened battlements one last time. He felt Arya's presence at his side, along with Davos, Corran, and a contingent of knights. Freed slaves trudged beside them, many still wary, but with fresh hope in their eyes. A hush fell, as though waiting for Gendry's word. He cleared his throat. "Let's go home," he said quietly, "or as close to a home as Essos could offer." Many of the freed slaves would choose new lives in Meereen or in other cities. The Westerosi would sail back across the narrow sea, burdened by the memory of what they had seen, but relieved that they had struck a blow for freedom. Hooves clattered on the rocky path as they filed out of the fortress gate. A new dawn stretched before them, the sun climbing over the jagged horizon. As the fortress receded behind them, Gendry felt a strange mix of sorrow and resolution. He remembered how he had once believed forging Valyrian steel for every great house might foster peace. The truth was more complicated. Evil found ways to twist power to its ends. But so too could good men and women unite to break that power apart, turning the tide against cruelty. Ahead lay the long road back to Meereen, then across the sea to Westeros. The threat of the Sons of the Flame had been quelled here, but the knowledge of forging black steel remained out in the world, both Gendry's version and the darker, blood-soaked variety. He could not unmake that fact, any more than he could erase the existence of swords themselves. All he could do was stand vigilant, teach those who would learn responsibly, and crush those who abused the gift. Arya nudged her horse beside him. "When we reach Meereen, I might not sail back right away," she said softly. "I feel a pull to see more of the East, to ensure there aren't other hidden strongholds." "You? Newans?" he considered. He was Lord Baratheon, with responsibilities at Storm's End, but he also felt the restlessness of the Forge. "I don't know," he admitted. "A part of me wants to go home, back to the stormy coasts, build roads and ships for my people, see that the land flourishes, but another part." He trailed off, meeting her gaze. "I can't stand by if there's a chance more of this madness is growing elsewhere." Arya gave him a small, rueful smile. "Well, you're good at forging. Whether it's swords, alliances, or a better world. The realm needs that. I doubt you'll be idle." No. They rode on, the sun rising higher, the freed slaves trailing in their wake, Prince Corran and the other Westerosi lords forming a protective escort. In time, the fortress vanished from view, leaving only dust and the faint odor of ash. They carried with them the memory of all that had been lost and won. The forging fires had gone dark at last, though the knowledge of Valyrian steel would endure in Gendry's hands. Whether it became a tool of unity, or a scourge of humanity, would forever depend on the hearts of those who wielded it. For now, at least, their swords had freed the oppressed. In the swirl of shifting alliances and uncertain tomorrows, that victory was worth savoring. Gendry thought of the ring of his hammer in Storm's End, the hush of the forge before the first blow. There was always another shape to be made, another test of mettle and will. He rode toward the horizon, Storm's fury at his side, guided by the faint glimmer of hope that, even in a land born of blood and fire, justice could yet be hammered into existence, one blow at a time.